Andrew Gold, welcome to Dad Saves America.
Thanks for having me.
So I heard you were coming to town. We got connected, and here we are. I want to set the table for viewers here in the States who might not know you. You we have a lot in common. One of which being that you came up through traditional media. So you were a journalist, you produced documentaries, and and then you encountered what is especially crazy to happen in the UK, some barriers to what you wanted to do as an already successful BBC. You called yourself a fallen presenter
Mm.
on your YouTube channel. So share that story. How did your presenterness fall? How you
Oh,
were a
yeah.
fallen presenter? What does that
Well,
mean?
I like the word. That was part of the initial branding with Heretics as a channel, because the Heretics has this sort of religious aspect to it, heretical, as in leaving a religion or something, or a fallen. You might be a fallen Catholic or a fallen whatever. I'm not saying you are that, are you? I think you're
I consider myself a rising
a
Catholic,
rising
actually. So
Catholic,
we'll talk about that.
and
But
so
yes,
should
yes,
you be.
you are the host, the creator of the Heretics show, and many
Yeah.
others before that.
But so the fallen was, that's why I chose that word. But ultimately, that's what it was. I was trying to make documentaries for HBO at one point. These sort of short docs that went out, and they did go out on HBO. They were initially made for Univision, and it was stuff. I'd go around subcultures, aliens, UFOs, people who believe in weird and strange things. I didn't. I was sort of the sort of nodding along guy, like, that's interesting, but not making fun of them necessarily, but having a bit of fun with them. So that was all great. My Exorcist film about an abusive exorcist in Argentina, won awards, film festival awards in the States and in the UK. The BBC took it. Everything was going really, really well. I was excited. I learned to speak 5 different languages so I could be this kind of journalist who does these documentaries all around the world.
How did you do that? How did you learn like fluent? Like you can think in 5 different languages?
Yeah,
How long did that take?
my Portuguese is gone, because they fall when you haven't used them for a long time. So Portuguese not very good. German is a bit mediocre, but I can read and talk fine. French and Spanish, I'm fine. I'm like almost like I am in English. That was from living in those countries. So that was the idea. I saw Louis Theroux, or Louis Theroux, as Americans might know him, documentary maker, and I thought, how do I do what he does? Go and meet all these subcultures and things. Well, what doesn't he have? Well, he doesn't speak languages. So I thought that will be my thing. And I spent about 12 years living in various different countries and learning the languages while I was there.
All right, here's your obligatory reminder to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. It really actually does help us out a lot. When we're trying to book awesome new guests, they look at how many subscribers are on the channel and they say, yep, this is worth doing. And I want to bring the best possible people to you that I can. Speaking of which, let's get back to the conversation. How long does it take to go from zero to really be able to think in and dream in the language and be truly fluent?
I think, well, it depends on the language. If you were to start learning Mandarin tomorrow, that's going to take like 50 lifetimes or something. But if it was for an English speaker, Spanish, for example, I think that's one of the easiest languages that an English speaker can learn, because it's half the words are English with just an O and an A at the end or something.
Yeah, the shun words.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the same, sion, exactly.
Yeah.
So that it depends how much you do, but if you really go for it within a year, I think, a year or so, if you end up with a wife or girlfriend from that place, it helps a lot. I had a French girlfriend for several years who didn't speak a word of English, and now my wife is Argentinian, so that helps hugely.
Is she Argentinian of Italian descent?
She's not. She's Argentinian of Polish descent or something.
I just realized recently that Argentina is like 60% Italian descent.
really,
It's like Italy 2.0.
It's really Italian. It's really Italian. It's like not being in Latin America, which is why I liked it, because I got bored of living. I was living in Colombia, in Medellin, for a year, and I got bored of being there. It's beautiful, wonderful for a holiday, but after some time, I was like, I need to.
So typical non-American traveling around, being worldly.
Not a typical.
We don't
Brit.
do this. We got a big country. We don't need to leave.
Yeah.
What you come back to the BBC and you're pitching things around, and what happens?
Yeah. Well, they didn't seem to like me very much. I got that feeling from the sort of young, mostly female executives who were working at the BBC. There was very much a feeling of, who is this guy in the room? And I thought, well, I've just made a documentary with no money, no anything. It's won awards for you guys. It's placed in your best of 2018 list, all of those things. And they're just looking at me like I'm dirt. And they said, okay, well, look, you've got to go to these production companies. Here is a list of them. Go speak to them. And I had an agent who also set me up with the production companies. So I saw about 100 different production companies over a period of about 6 years. Every single one of them, 100% of them, not 99%, 100% of them, said to me at one point, look, this is a bit difficult to bring up, a bit awkward. And I said, I know what you're going to say. And they said, we can't have you as the guy on screen on the TV because you're a white man, and we can't have more white men. So that will not sell. The BBC will not take it. You're going to have to go off screen and pretend that these stories were made by whoever the minority is that we put on screen instead. So I said, no, I'm not doing that. And I put my foot down for years and years. And a lot of people were saying to me, friends of mine, why don't you could
Just
this
do
is
it.
yeah, you'll be a producer for the BBC. I said that no journalist worth their salt would do that. These are my stories. I spent years learning languages, delving into their cultures. I found stories about a tribe in Bolivia that makes adulterers put their feet in ant hills, like ants, biting them and stuff. And gay conversion in Ecuador, where they were torturing people. These were stories I spent years finding out. And the idea that I was just going to give it to like some guy who happens to be Muslim or whatever it is, no. So I didn't. And I was just on minimum wage, messing around for 6-7 years, trying to make ends meet, really. And eventually started the podcast because that's all I could do. But the worst part I would say about that is that a lot of friends of mine, a lot of people on Twitter, all over the place, didn't believe me. That was
Mhm.
the worst part. Because I think, okay, if you want to have a discussion about affirmative action, everything's up for debate. I'm happy to debate things. I'm not a fan of it personally, but at least we can debate that. But when they say it doesn't happen, and you have the statistics in the UK to show that it must be happening because minorities are significantly overrepresented on TV, they will just not accept it. No, it's not happening.
The thing that's so we've been used to this in the States for a long time. And there's even before 2020 and George Floyd and everything got sent into the stratosphere of lunacy.
Mm.
There was an organization out of, I think it might be USC or UCLA, that would actually track representation in the media. And everything you think about American media when you watch Super Bowl ads, which is to say, there are only mixed race couples in the United States. There's only like, it's only ever like a
Yeah.
United Colors of Benetton everywhere you go. Is true. It's like super, it was already like a super overrepresented thing. And I even participated in that insofar as like when I was working as a promos commercial director, you have this weird, I don't even know what you'd call it. There's probably a prisoner's dilemma model to work with this, where you are the producer or the director on this ad, and you're not going to be the one to have an all-white cast in your ad,
Mm.
and therefore each and every producer feels they have to have representation in their single 30-second ad, and there's only maybe 3 characters. So by definition, lest and if it turns out that like you didn't have anybody that was great in the auditions, you just had to make it work. It would just come down like this is all you can't have an all white cast in this. What
Mm.
are you nuts? And so, but you, and so that's been happening here for decades. For decades, this goes back to the '90s. But you're the indigenous people of the United Kingdom, so I don't
Yeah.
understand that.
Well, it's the
Like,
same in the States, though, isn't it? Well, oh no, maybe it's not. Oh,
no,
I forgot. I forgot about
we're a nation
that.
of immigrants. We've been a diverse people from the get go, and obviously there's slavery. Like there's always been a lot of people
Yeah,
here.
yeah, you're right. You're right.
But you're the UK.
But the thing is, it shouldn't matter anyway. Like, I don't care if I'm indigenous to whatever. I don't care who's indigenous. If you're good enough, you get it. But what it would imply, the fact that we do have, I think it's the minorities are overrepresented on UK TV screens at a rate of something like 2.5 to 1. Now, that doesn't even take into account the fact that, if you're a first generation immigrant, you're not going to probably get on TV there. When I went to Argentina, I wasn't expecting to be suddenly like hoisted to become their big, because
Andrew has arrived.
Yeah, because there's they don't know who I am. I don't have contacts, which you get from generations and generations of being in a country. It's really unlikely someone can just go to a new country with no contacts, they don't even speak the language, they don't do this, and suddenly they are like on the TV. So if we were to take that into account, it's absurd how high the numbers of minorities are on screen. I have some sympathy for the idea that there are people growing up in that country. They want to see people who look like them. They want to feel like they could make it in that world. What gets lost, though, is that every single time an affirmative action or affirmative whatever positive discrimination decision is made, there is one person who is losing out. So those ads that you spoke about, there is somebody who was maybe better for that ad, who had worked harder maybe, who's lost that job. And it's not like, oh, well, they're fine because they're white and they live in a palace. Those people are struggling. So And we've seen, I don't know
They
how
might live in a palace in the UK.
they might do. Yeah, there's no palette in the UK. Well, I know what you mean, but
Abby.
we live in tiny homes compared to you guys. Like when I come here, I can't believe how big everyone's houses are. It's ridiculous.
It is a funny thing about America and traveling abroad. My son's studying in Rome, and he was just back for a brief, his first sort of return back, and he's like, everything in Europe is worse than America. He's like, everything's smaller, it's not as good.
Yeah.
Now,
It's not as comfortable.
it's we have a lot of romance in this country about when about traveling abroad and about, oh, we should be like Scandinavia. It's like, I've been in flats in Denmark. They're tiny.
Mm.
It's like most Americans wouldn't be comfortable
Well,
with this.
Scandinavia's gone now anyway. It's finished. Scandinavia's over. Scandinavia's finished. It's the next, whatever's next, because Scandinavia's gone. And Ireland's about to go as well through immigration, and the culture's gone. It's not what it was. Those places have been just absolutely decimated. Sweden is the worst example, but Ireland is about to go that way. And so you've got this place. I mean, these were the woke places. They wanted to become superpowers of morality. There was actually an expression, I can't remember what it was. It's something like because America's a superpower economically and politically, and the UK culturally, and yeah, exactly, the UK and maybe sort of Japan or China. There's a few countries in the world that have this kind of cultural import, or and some of the Scandinavian countries and Ireland, for example, they didn't quite have that necessarily. So they want to become these moral superpowers, and that has just turned out disastrously.
I'll come back to that. Although it is funny that why would the land of Yanta law, where you are not the special one and you shouldn't stand out, and how dare you drive a nicer car? Why would they? That's interesting to hear that there would even be a desire to stand out at all in Scandinavia.
Everyone's selfish. That's exactly what I think. That makes sense. What you just said. That decision to say, "Hey, we're not the ones who want the bigger car and want all those things." That is saying, "Hey, look how morally virtuous we are." They've chosen that path for their status claim. That we might get it from dominance or success. They've chosen virtue, and it has absolutely screwed them up. And now they're going, "Oh, what have we done?" And yeah, too late.
So you go around to 100 production companies that are feeders into the BBC, which is this weird government monopoly thing. We have that too in the form of PBS, but nobody cares, and NPR, but nobody cares. Like, our media ecosystem is such that our state-run media, maybe this is the best thing about America in a way. Still, it's like dying, but it's still there. NPR was upset, I remember, when I think it was Elon Musk or somebody called them or labeled it on Twitter. I think it was like state-run media or state-owned media. They're like, "How dare you?" It's like, that's what
Yes.
it's in the name. National Public Radio. National and public are the two other parts that aren't radio. But it's so frowned upon to be like a government-run enterprise here, culturally, still kinda, that
Well, the BBC isn't government run necessarily. It's sort of adjacent. It's supposed to be independent, and they often go against the government because the BBC is captured by the left ideologically. So when we've had the Conservatives, for example, the BBC is very anti them. So it's not so much government captured. It is just utterly like all the arty lovey kind of thing, as in the States. It's completely taken by morons who are trying to cut off their children's.
Just right into it. So you've got you're getting this ridiculous pushback for being indigenous English for TV that will run in England. Was there like was it at all about like this is you're pitching things that sound a little like what's the term, like white messiah complex, like you're going to these indigenous peoples and you as the white presenter look like you're looking down on them? Was like, what make the best case you can for the concern, not just being pants pissing cowardice, which is what it mostly probably is, just knowing the industry. But let's pretend it's not utter cowardice.
There were murmurings of that in some of the meetings, so that's a really good point. Then I tried different topics that were in the UK, and it was still the same thing was said to me. Still, we don't want you doing it. But you're right. That's an argument that is often made. Do we want this person going in and that's a new decision in documentaries, that the person on screen has to be from the thing that they're looking at, which I think is a great shame. And from the what's the word? Anthropologically.
Yeah.
God, that's not an easy one to say. Anthropologically,
What kind of Englishman are you? You're supposed to talk better than us.
I know we don't. We just have accents. But I mean, I'm sure if you are an anthropologist, you're very good at saying that word. But the rest of us don't say it that often. I mean, I can count on one hand how many times I've said the word. But from that point of view, it's a great shame because I understand the whole. You don't want to be some sort of Rudyard Kipling going into India and looking at these natives or whatever. But there is something to be said for, hey, this is for British TV, right? And it might sell to America and other places as well, the West. Well, we want to look at this other culture. Let's look at them and see what's intriguing and different about them. And I'm from this English culture, la-di-da-di-da. The other point to this is that I'm Jewish, right? So that is something. If we're going to say you have to be from a minority, maybe that's a minority. Except
that used to be a point scorer.
Yeah, well, look, it shouldn't be because none of it should matter. It should just be if you are good, you are good. That's all that matters. There's a book called Jews Don't Count by David Baddiel, a comedian, a very good comedian. He's very smart and it's a very good book. But I argue with him on this. We're both Jewish. And he says, oh, it's not right that the woke hierarchy of oppression doesn't allow Jews in. It also doesn't really allow East Asians in. It doesn't allow...
No model minorities allowed. If you
if
you succeed in Western culture, then you must therefore be white adjacent or whatever.
Well, their philosophy falls apart, doesn't it? Because if some minorities are able to succeed, okay, they can say about Jews, but you pass as white. Okay, what about the East Asians? What's their excuse for doing extremely well?
Up.
South Asians as well, Indians. Black people from Africa do really well in the
Nigerians.
UK. Yeah.
In the US too, they way outperform native-born Americans.
Whereas black people from the Caribbean do not do well. So it's very clear and obvious that this is a cultural issue, and there are all sorts of ways to address it, perhaps. But to decide that it's just got to be... So anyway, David Baddiel has said they should let the Jews in and let the East Asians in. And I'm saying, no, that's the litmus test for this is a bad philosophy. Get rid of it and treat people as individuals. And yes, there will be disparities sometimes, but that's what you get. That's life, unfortunately. There's 7 billion of us or something in the planet. It's not going to work. Yeah, well, there you go. 9 now, I'm hearing. 10.
It keeps going.
Yeah, and it's never going to be perfect. And anyone who's ever strived for perfection has not just failed, but created atrocities.
So you were kind of sort of canceled. And it's very fun you go on your Substack, which I recommend people check out, and canceled is right there in the middle. Is pointing out being canceled become kind of like a marketing ploy?
Yeah, of course it has. But
I've been canceled. It's like, you look like you're doing pretty good. Shut up, I've been canceled.
The people who read it, though, I think know that. And it's part of, you're going into an unwritten bind here. We're getting a pact of sorts. They know that and we know that we are trying as much as possible to make a career outside of the mainstream, which before 15 years ago was almost impossible.
Yeah.
The last 15 years, 20 years, particularly the last 5-10 years, with the advances of internet, with Substack coming along, with YouTube, suddenly we're able to do it, and the mainstream media doesn't like it. Now, I think 30% of news in the US and the UK is through social media now. And the mainstream media, really don't like that. So,
I am really curious if you feel like the concept of the mainstream is already dead, because I don't understand the people. Like, I guess there's old people that just watch traditional news and think it's not a bunch of nonsense, and just, I mean, we have this issue right now where, like, CBS and others, they blatantly lie to their audience. They conduct these interviews and edit them dishonestly, and we all see it and learn about it. Like, do you think the dynamics are the same in the UK? Like, who are the people in the UK who believe the BBC?
Well, I don't know how many believe it, but I think we know, look, if it's 30% social media, then 70% are getting it from their mainstream or legacy, we can call them, to sort of make them sound more outdated. There was a bias I read about this morning. I can't remember what it's called, but it's where you read something, if you happen to be a specialist in a subject, say you are a journalist or something.
Gelman amnesia.
Right, that's it, yes. So you read that and you go, well, hang on, I know this is not just wrong, it's saying the opposite of what, it couldn't be further from the truth. And then you go to the next page and it's something that's not your specialty and you're like, this is interesting. So That unfortunately happens, but the more power we get on the sort of social media independent side, the more either they're going to have to buck their ideas up and start being more honest with us, the mainstream, because people are fed up with them, because that 30% figure is going to grow, or people are just going to turn off their TVs. And the BBC is struggling, and a lot of the TV channels in the UK are really struggling, and yet, just like Hollywood with the woke stuff, they persist against their better interests, against their own economic interests.
It is I am very much a free marketeer, and it has been interesting to watch so many cultural forces align that are like, first of all, fundamentally anti-market and like crony. They're
Mm.
like self-interested, but they're not market interested. They're not like, we want competition. They're like, no, we want all the money. And so like the advertiser space is very consolidated and can exert a lot of cultural force by virtue of like just saying, we won't advertise on you and then you're dead.
Mhm.
How has, as you've sort of shifted into this other space, how has that impacted you? How do you think about like the landscape for trying to
Mm.
tell the truth in new media versus,
It's
this
hard.
crusty old place?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, the standards that YouTube set. I mean, YouTube is pretty much the only place you can go to. Like, people watching will say Rumble. Well, Rumble is good that it's there as an alternative, but unfortunately, by virtue of its own message, it's only going to attract people who are very far one way, which is not great. You want to be out there where everybody is,
Mm.
and also it isn't quite there technologically. When you look at it, it doesn't. It's not as
Yeah.
nice to the interface. Is not very nice yet. Maybe they'll get there. And the money's not great because they do struggle probably to get more ads. I don't know, but I haven't been able to earn money from Rumble. So YouTube is your one place really. Twitter's starting to get there. And they are much harsher on creators, maybe because it's so hard to monitor millions of creators at once,
Yeah.
than they are on TV channels. I mean, it's getting a little bit better, but for some time you couldn't use words like Nazi. You could not say Nazi. Yet the History Channel on TV all the time, sharks and Nazis or whatever. You could say sharks. I think OCD, I used the word OCD, that got flagged, right? Demonetized. They want people to not talk about anything of any interest. The word COVID, of course, was completely a no-no. Now it's gotten better because partly because of Elon Musk. I think he's forced them. He said, I don't care about the advertisers. I don't care about the money. We're just going to keep going. And the advertisers balked and they went, oh, okay, well, we'll still advertise. And that showed YouTube, okay, maybe we can be a bit stronger, especially if we want to compete with Musk and have interesting things on our platform, just as Musk would. So it's getting a little bit better, but we've had to navigate on YouTube. Even now, swear words and things, you have to make sure you've cut a lot of those out.
Yeah. Your past work seems like it started a thread that continues to the work you've done today. So and you've done a lot of focus on cults.
Mm.
So what is a cult?
Oof. So I don't think there's any one thing that defines a cult. I think there was a book I really liked that had the theory. It's called Cultish by Amanda Montell, and I often speak about that because that changed how I felt about a lot of it. Because you get a lot of, I mean, cult experts themselves. They don't like this. They like to say there's a line. This is a cult, Jonestown. That is not a cult, transgenderism, and because there isn't an obvious leader of transgenderism. If you look at it more as a spectrum, so your local book club is cultish in many respects. Maybe it's a 2 out of 10. You go to your book club and you feel like you have certain views about your book, the book that you've just read, that you couldn't say in the meeting because you'd be kicked out. Now, if that's your only social activity, you feel particularly unable to speak out because you don't want to lose that. That's your friendship group and so on. So that's slightly cultish. Scientology might be a 9 out of 10, and maybe Heaven's Gate a 10 out of 10, something like that. So a cult, as far as I want to call it, is anything that just makes you feel like you can't say what you really feel. That's what I think. Other people would say you need that bite model, which Stephen Hassan wrote, which is they all stand for different, all the acronyms. So does it have this? Does it have a leader? Does it attack you if you leave? And if you're isolated, does it isolate you from your family? Well, most of those things the trans cult does do. Most of those things your local book club might do in a very, very small way. So a cult, yeah, anything makes you think and go one way and you can't escape it, I would say, as a cult.
So in that's an interesting way to think about it. But my challenge in thinking about it that way would be, well, how is that not then? Does that not just say that any form of social group is on a cult spectrum?
Yeah.
Because friendships can be frayed by your behavior. You know, you come together and you like people partly because of who they are and the way they behave. And if you start to change, you might not want to be friends anymore. If you
Yeah.
change too much, like there's a so is that does that mean just cultishness is just a part of any type of human group?
Yeah, I think it's essentially humanity. I think cultishness is humanity. It's just happened so many times naturally that we've gotten into these cults. To me, it only makes sense that it is basic communities or just social activities where it becomes too strict. And then at what point do you say this is now a cult? Well, I think that's really hard to define. So that's humanity. We evolved in evolutionary tribes. Those tribes were cultish. If you said the wrong thing, you were kicked out. You were on the savannah. So cultishness is written into our DNA. It's who we are. We will do it no matter what. If we solved the problems that you and I might be against, we'd find other ones that maybe we're on the wrong different sides of, and we'd start to find those things and would separate into our tribes and groups. Somebody would rise as a charismatic leader within. In our maybe we'd call it anti-woke, and that's not nice because you don't want to have a group that is negative. You know,
Yeah.
you want to be like, no, we're pro-truth. Well, let's call it that. Well, maybe Elon Musk and Jordan Peterson are the leaders of that. In some respect, our beliefs and our tribes are cultish. There are times that I found myself maybe less incentivized or less willing to criticize others within my group because it's going to make it difficult for me at work, which this is my work. It's going to be a bit awkward, and maybe I quite like them because they have the same beliefs as me. So I'm trapped in this cultishness as much as anyone else is. So what I would look for when I criticize one is where they've really deviated from truth. When you say a man is a woman and a woman, or when you say, hey, we need to make sure there's more diversity on TV, there's not enough, and you go, well, this is palpably, provably wrong. That's when it's a problem.
Well, what's the benchmark for enough if it's already multiple deviations away from like representing the public, as an
Or
example?
never, because no cult that achieves its goals. Scientology never achieved its goals, and oh, that's it. Let's go home. Bye, Tom Cruise. Go back to your house, and just it never achieves its goals because you have to always be fighting for something. That's what makes you feel special in the cult.
What are some of the most interesting slash bizarre cults you've studied and done films and written about?
Well, I like that Exorcist one. The reason I followed him is because he was so charismatic, and what a lot of people don't realize about exorcism is that it wasn't very popular. From about 2,000 years ago. It was involved in sort of a separate baptism kind of ritual. It was done to stop people from going to other pagan religions. So you were expelling the pagan gods from them, really. And over the years, it just almost fell entirely out of practice. And what brought it back was the film, The Exorcist, in the 1970s, wasn't it, I think?
Yeah.
1970?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but roughly.
Something like that. And it's extraordinary what impact that movie had, because in these far-flung places around South America, different parts of the world, they saw that movie and everybody brought it back because it was this great charismatic snake oil kind of trick. So this exorcist even had the music, Tubular Bells from The Exorcist, that played in his masses. He had posters of the Exorcist film with his face superimposed on them all around the church. So it was an incredible example of a modern cult that has been so affected by modern culture and social contagion. So again, that's why some of the cultish aspects of wokeness, they're just this social contagion. That's what's going on here. So I found that really interesting, and how people would go see him, they'd have their exorcism. I helped to perform the exorcisms, and you saw them get better. They would recover from their mental illnesses, which was extraordinary.
The You made a lot of hay in being critical of Scientology.
Mm.
My one interaction with Scientology is that my wife, when she lived in Los Angeles, before we met, had like gone to one seminar for something that was like a health related thing and had nothing to do, because they have these things they offer, especially in Los Angeles as you're walking down the street. I don't know. From that point forth, we would occasionally get calls asking for her that were pretty intrusive, and they would manage to find her no matter where she went.
Wow.
Like we moved multiple times. And at one point, I got one of these calls and it was on my cell phone and was asking for her and asking about her and asking to confirm her address. And I went like crazy on the person, real. I was like, this is her, like, I went like old school Jersey Italian jerk and just was like, go F yourself. Like, this is completely outrageous. You are harassing my wife. I'm blah, 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 whatever I said. And I got off the phone and she was like, oh no, you're going to make it so much worse. Now they're going to think you're one of these people that keeps me from something or other. It actually did stop, but it didn't leave me with a very good taste for that group.
Hmm.
So what was your experience of exploring Scientology, and did you have anybody like come at you and like
Hmm.
threaten you? Because I know it can be quite like a threatening organization, actually.
I had some angry messages online. There would be people hanging out in the chat when it was a live premiere of my YouTube. The reason it went Scientology ways is because it was about all different cults. It was my old channel, and I noticed that if I ever did one about Scientology, it did better. So I did another one and another one, and then if it had Tom Cruise in the thumbnail, it did better. So I did ones about Tom Cruise, and people are fascinated because if aliens came down today and said, what's the weirdest thing about this whole community? I think it might be that probably our most famous actor in the world is also the head of a cult, a really dangerous, weird, horrible cult, and no one cares. Like no one cares. There's like if you look at someone the wrong way, you're fired forever. You've been obviously some of them are, but you can't do anything like that. But the things he's done, the things that he's supported are arguably worse and on a much grander scale. Scientology, yeah, so they didn't go after me that much. And at one point, I think my videos were getting up there with the most on the internet. I was probably, along with one or two others, the authority for Scientology for about a year, which, I never expected that to happen.
I mean, we're here in Austin, and the author of, I think, if I remember the correct, was the book was Going Clear, which then became
Mm,
a
yeah.
HBO series about Scientology. That seemed to also put a real ding in it. Like it brought it to the surface, at least here in the States, quite a
Mm.
bit.
Oh yeah, well, what really took Scientology out was I think first WikiLeaks and then South Park, and now they've got like 20, 30,000 people left. They claim they've got millions. They are dying, and that's why they don't give me so much trouble. It might be why they stopped harassing your wife because too many people have spoken out at once, and they
Hmm.
can't. They don't have enough. They don't have they don't have enough of them to do this. So they are on their knees right now, I think. There's still money. That's the difference because so much comes from Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise makes all these films. There was a joke South Park made when they did that Scientology episode. That was they had the poster and it said, "Come on, Jews, show them who really runs Hollywood." But there's truth in very South Park style. But there's truth in that because I mean, Tom Cruise now. You look at the Mission Impossible stuff that he does. You look on Wikipedia. Like the first Mission Impossible had like loads of different producers, all different random people. Gradually, with each one, the producer list gets smaller and smaller until it's just Tom Cruise and I've forgotten his name. But there's the guy he always works with. Oh, I forgot his name. But the two of them are both registered as living in Scientology in Clearwater, Florida. They're both like this other guy, Christopher McQuarrie, and he's registered as living in one of those Scientology buildings, despite not being a Scientologist. So apparently, so you look at that now. That production is just those two. The budget has just multiplied by like 20. It's huge, huge money coming in. You look at Tom Cruise now. Most of the jobs he does, most of the jobs he takes, are basically propaganda for Scientology. There are films where he's coming back to life again, and there's new versions of him. He's the big hero who saves the day.
I love that movie.
Yeah, it was a great movie, The Edge
Yeah,
of
yeah,
Tomorrow.
with the Emily Blunt, the sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
It was a weird one because it had like two titles that were like what is it, The Edge of Tomorrow or something like that. I forget
Yeah,
what it was called.
that was it. But
Yeah.
that's Scientology propaganda. That's like basic Scientology propaganda. It was a good film. So that's what he's doing right now, and he's they're pumping money into Scientology, but it's failing. But yeah, just quickly the WikiLeaks and South Park. So I spoke to there's a guy called Mark Headley who's one of the ex-Scientologists, and he was actually responsible for what they call auditing Tom Cruise. So he would have these sessions,
Yeah.
with a potato. Or it's not a potato, but it's like these kind of wires that make you, if you're lying, it does one thing or whatever, and you have to talk about your past lives and all of that stuff. So he did that with Tom Cruise, and Mark fell asleep, and it offended Tom Cruise or something like that, because he fell asleep because they don't let them ever sleep. These guys, they sleep like 2 hours a day. They're working. But he left eventually with his wife. His wife was higher up, so knew more about all the things in Scientology. When you're lower down, you don't know. Scientology keeps it from you and tells you that if you know about this, you will get pneumonia and die. It's very specific. Pneumonia is what you will get. If you're like a low down Scientologist or even relatively high up, you can't know the backstory about Lord Xenu and all of that stuff.
But Does that continue in the? I mean, since the '90s, we've had the internet.
Yeah, but they deliberately avoid looking it up because they think they're going to get pneumonia.
So it's like the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. You can't like don't eat from the tree of
Hmm.
knowledge because you'll get pneumonia.
It's exactly like that. That's
I'm laughing, but I'm Catholic, and so we'll get to that. But
I wrote about this. I had a book out called The Psychology of Secrets, which everybody should get. And in the first chapter, I do that comparison with Scientology, the Tree of Knowledge, and also I was looking at Hasidic Judaism. Julia Hart, who's a Netflix, she had like my unorthodox life. She's like a reality star now, but she was. She grew up Hasidic Jewish, and there's another story where like they had to get rid of the TV or something. Their teacher was like, "Someone in this has got a TV at home. You have to get rid of it." The TV again is this sort of knowledge. You're not supposed to have knowledge. It's religions and cults will stop you having outside knowledge. It's how that's the number one way to keep control.
let's talk about the that's the other
Mm,
group that you've done. Well, I mean, you've done a lot of work on these different groups, but the Hasidic Jews is an interesting one as a Jewish person yourself. So tell me about that. What
yeah.
did you sort of discover? My interactions with Hasidic Jews is as a former New Yorker, my favorite place to buy camera gear was B&H Photo
Mm,
in New York City, which is run by Hasidic Jews, and so you couldn't go to B&H and not. It was almost like
hmm.
a temple of technology
Interesting. Yeah. Well,
and maybe a tax shelter, and I was okay with that.
I have no idea. I mean, they are so secretive. They're so interesting and weird and strange. As a Jewish person, I think what I want people to know is that they make up like 1% or like 5%. Like we don't know that they are to us what maybe a Jehovah's Witness is to a sort of typical Christian. You know, it's like, oh, those people. I never met any until I started doing this job. So with as different as it gets in that sense, except I suppose ethnically or genetically, there's Ashkenazi Jewish.
Mhm.
So they're really secretive. They have this community. I have had to learn over the years that they can argue that they have it better than us. You know, they have it the right way. That they have storytelling. Their kids sit around and they tell each other stories about the past, and they learn. And they're very intelligent. They're very business savvy. They some of them. And so interesting. However, yeah, no individual liberty, particularly for women. Like any kind of really strong religious group, the women don't often come out with much individual liberty. So that's the issue with them. No electricity, things like that, and yeah, an interesting group of people, really smart people if you do get to speak to them, but they come across as quite rude as well because they have very different ideas about politeness and things. So they are a bit rude and brash when you walk past them. Crazy that they don't speak English often. You know, they grow up in New York or London,
Yeah.
and they don't. That's insane. If you think about it, growing up in a country, like how closed your mind has to be to not know the language of the people whose country you live in, it's mad.
It's it is interesting, I got out of school, I spent the first 12 years of my professional life in New York City, so which is like a very, it's I love New York City even as like you could call me a right winger perhaps, but
Mm.
I still think it's the greatest city, certainly in the country if not the world. And you have a lot of these enclaves in New York City. Um, you know, often with associated mobs. So you've got like, you got Little Italy shrinking because Chinatown is consuming it. But you've got the Italian mob, you've got the Russians and the Russian mob, and you've got
Mm.
then like the Ukrainian like there is a enclave thing that seems like maybe it's probably a function of surviving as immigrants in super dense cities. London's probably got this. Does London have similar
I think so.
ghetto enclave dynamics to this day?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that is it's partly about survival, and that mob aspect is what I was saying before about cultishness. You leave a bunch of humans in a particular place, they're going to start to sort of put up walls. Some people are going to start taking charge. You get this Lord of the Flies kind of scenario, and those are the people in charge, keeping the other Jews or Russians or Greeks at bay, and making sure that they give them a bit of the old, Godfather 2, walking around. Was it Little Italy, or was it actually Italy? No, it was Little Italy. It was in New York, wasn't it? Bit of
Yep, yep.
money paying off. That's what happens.
Um, all right. So you are an atheist?
Yes.
Why?
No, it doesn't work that way. You have to tell me why you believe. I don't have to tell you why I don't.
But you're not an agnostic, so you're not an I don't
I
know.
think it's the same word, and I think people I either use them wrongly or shouldn't, or they use them rightly, and it shouldn't be that way. It makes no sense to have both words suggests that there is a possible position whereby you somehow know, 100% that there is no God. That's impossible. That is impossible. So if somebody tells you that that's their situation, then they're lying. And I think so. Then everybody gets angry at me and says, "Oh, so you're an agnostic?" And okay, if you really,
Okay.
if that's what they want, then fine. But it's something that is like I'm as agnostic about God as I am about Dawkins. It was the flying spaghetti monster.
Sure, sure.
Was any other mad as I trans whatever. Any of those things you know what I'm saying.
So yes, I'm gonna get to the am I in a cult question, but I wanna
Hmm.
one of the things that's interesting to me about the times we're in is it does seem like we need something
Yeah.
that hold us together, that points to a reason to be around, a reason to have equality or
Hmm.
dignity. I had Brett Weinstein and Heather Hang on the show,
Hmm.
and we got into a conversation about faith, and I said I don't really understand the argument for equal dignity absent the soul. Um, and it's part of what anchors my faith. I am Catholic. I'm a practicing Catholic. So, um, but at the heart of that, to me, is partly there's the truth claims, which we could get into if you want, and you can beat me up for them, which would be fun. But there's also just this sense of, well, through an evolutionary lens, we're just pure materialist. We somehow there was this Big Bang thing. Don't get me started on where that came from,
Hmm.
but through a process that looks kind of like the math game, the game of life, a couple initial conditions gave rise to an emergent complexity that ultimately accidentally ended up with these conscious creatures, and we are having this conversation, and maybe we have free will, maybe we don't. What does that mean? I don't know. um if you're going to be like an alien observer, we are not equal creatures. There's like no world in which we have equality other than in like a kind of linguistic tautology. Like, well, you're both humans, therefore you're equal in your humanness.
Hmm.
So, how do you think about like the liberal principle of equality, and can it survive the death of God?
Hmm. God. I I feel like my morals personally have always been about equality, and I've never ever believed in any kind of deity. So that came naturally from me. Um, I had this debate with a guy called Connor Tomlinson who was on the show, and he's Christian, and he was saying it just seems that these morals we have are too perfect. They've almost been sculpted for us to be the way we are and to have a functioning community. So, for example, equality and those kinds of things. And I said, but that's exactly. So he's suggesting so God must have imbued us with them, and that's what the Bible teaches us. And I said, but that's exactly the argument of the evolutionary theorists, which is this took 300,000 years and millions of years before that, before we were even human. But the last 300,000 years of different tribe dynamics and countless generations of tribes that went wrong because they didn't have the right morals that makes for a
Sure.
good society. So this was the inevitability of 300,000 years, which is such a long time that it's impossible for people to even imagine how long that is. And those who had that desire to create fairly equal societies prospered. So it makes sense that genetically that was passed down to us. We have an innate sense of unfairness, which you see in children. You see children at a very young age before they even know what God is.
Yeah.
They have this idea of, there's the fairness, and if you've got this many toys, that person, they'd rather have fewer toys than have more toys, but fewer than their friend.
Yeah, we have this sense of proportionality and fairness that's very kind of root zero sum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you have too much, I somehow feel like you took it from me, even if that's not technically true, because we no longer live in the jungle with a tree that only has so much fruit in the season. But I guess the challenge, I would say, so but how does that give you an ethic in the modern world to say I care about equality? Why does that lead up to you believing that that's important?
Because from a young age, that's imbued in us. That's an immutable characteristic of humans. Not everyone. But most of us really care from a young age about fairness because we learned as children. I think we have it in our DNA, and we also learned, hey, why did that person get more than me? Well, if you then said, haha, I'm going to take more from everybody else, the tribe is pretty good at putting you in your place. If you decide I'm just gonna be the guy who takes everything, wahaha, you didn't survive till now, right? There are still psychopaths, but I'm saying your lineage, you wouldn't have gotten here. Those tribes didn't do well. The tribes that had too many people in them who said, screw your fairness, I'm taking everything, those ones died off. The ones who were just curious, out of curiosity, interested in, we should have the same stuff, who just felt that way, who had that kind of empathy, they survived, and that's who we are, most of us today.
So, the part of this story, I've always been sort of sympathetic. I like Jonathan Haidt, this like evolutionary psychology storytelling. I say storytelling because there is a certain amount of this that is like scientism. It's a story. It's not a. It's a. We can imagine that this was a beneficial rule set, and so somehow it got imbued mimetically because the more groupish, more altruistic people survived in groups than the ones that didn't. We don't really know that to be the case. It's really a story that we're telling of a pattern that we're kind of pushing back into the past. The harder part for me about that is twofold, and I'm curious. I was excited to talk to you about this because you're like, you've been spending so much time looking at cults and cultishness, and now, with your Heretics channel, you're focused on this modern current cultishness, which is this transgenderism and this woke mind virus that has all the symptoms of a cult in so many ways, including the inability or complete disinterest in debate and cancel culture. But isn't most of human history not that? It's like, yes, we're sort of equal in our groups, but most of human history is tribal warfare and plundering of other groups, and Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great, and the kind of liberal era we are in. And I mean, I use liberal in the classical sense, this like Enlightenment, Magna Carta. It all, like, this is like a tiny window in that 300,000 year human as a creature, or however long it is, Homo sapien evolutionary path. And then we have this tiny window where this essentially metaphysical claim bubbles up and says, no, 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 we're all equal in a kind of legal rights kind of way, a kind of Lockean equality, and that is actually the thing we should fight for. And it catches on in this narrow window of time in the West, and now seems to be being killed and replaced by that looks a lot more like the rest of human history, of just, oh, I can't hire you because you don't have enough melanin in your skin.
Yeah.
So that's just the old ways. That's just the old tribal ways that dominated all of humankind.
We are tribal.
So how does that comport with this evolutionary psychology of altruism story? It seems like we're not that. We're only that in very narrow contexts.
I don't think we're altruistic. I don't think we're. I've got
or unfair, or being biased towards a kind of equality, let's say.
I think, look, we like equality in terms of perception. We like to show that we gave somebody else as much as they gave us. But back at home, we don't really mind if we took an extra, if we got some advantage from it. So it's about show. You need to. You wouldn't survive in your tribe if the tribe saw that you were stealing. That's no good. But left to their own devices with no punishments, and I'm sure you agree with this, people do, right? People will do awful things. That's why we need harsh punishments and strict rules and things like that. But there's nothing to stop. So I don't think it is an inherent thing. I think most people want to have a society that feels fair, mostly to themselves. They have a bias towards whatever's fair to them. That's what's happening with a lot of the wokeness, isn't it? So I think we know that societies work with you have to have as many people as possible believing in what could be called a religion of fairness. That's the only way it can work. Otherwise, people are going to start toppling other people. Those people right now, the woke people, or communists back in the day, or Nazis as well, they thought it was unfair. And in many respects, maybe it was. And so they toppled the regime and atrocities happened. And it will happen again.
The this is like new territory for me in how in thinking about it, because I've spent a lot of my time thinking about like economic type arguments, which are
Sure.
very like they're not rights based at the end of the day. They have like a kernel of that, but it's mostly like, well, what generates efficient outcomes? Like what, like I've done videos about how price gouging can be good.
Which is why
It's
evolutionary theory should work right, like perfectly for you. That should be something you jump on. By the way, I would want viewers to know I don't take any pleasure from my atheism. I'm not an advocate. You know, you say I don't make videos about it.
no, you don't.
I don't like it. I don't like the snootiness of a lot of atheists. Like, haha, you believe in something big, like, bigger than you. Like, great, you should. Like, how wonderful. I wish I did. I'm a reluctant atheist, very, very much so. I would love to be shown something. I've often looked for it, and I've never found like even a tiny iota of anything. And I'm desperate for it because I go to sleep at whatever time at night and I think about, I know this is sad, but the abyss, and I think about aging, and I think there's nothing next, and I think it would be very comforting for me to believe in something. And if I could take a pill that would make me believe, I think I would, because it would make the next 50 years of my life a little bit more comfortable.
I thought of this. I thought I was almost going to say, you know, there's this Jew 2,000 years ago that you might like. It's like the worst. It's like let's have the show be the most flat-footed evangelicism by someone who's deeply
What, to get a
uncomfortable
Jew?
doing that. Yeah,
Yeah, I
no,
mean,
that's like a triple score.
I used to be sat in synagogues. You know, my parents never mentioned God. A lot of Jews are very secular,
Mhm.
but we did go for sort of the high holy days once or twice a year, and there'd be someone's bar mitzvah. It's more of a social thing you have to go to. A lot of people go to church for the same reason. You know, you're making appearances. But even when I was 5, I just thought this is nonsense, and I was very against the Jewish version of it, because you turn against your own thing often. You know, now I
Yeah.
don't pick it out above any other one. But the rabbis seemed pretentious to me. And I didn't know the word pretentious when I was 7, but something about them rubbed me the wrong way. And I
Yeah.
didn't like my teachers at school either, right? I went to a Christian school. We did the Lord's Prayer every day, those kinds of
Oh,
things as
that's
well.
interesting.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was very against all of the things. As I've gotten older and hopefully a bit wiser, I don't know, I feel very relaxed and chilled about it. And I want everybody to have, whether Jewish, Christian, to have their views. It just isn't something that I get at all.
When the one thing I've been thinking about, and there's some books I've sort of loaded up to maybe help me with it, is whether or not the kind of liberalism that I think you and I share,
Mm,
you know, the belief in essentially the Western values of like of the Magna. You guys don't have a formal constitution, but
mm.
there's like a constitution of the people that we formalized here in the States.
Yeah.
Um, Equal rights, the right to life, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I've come to think that this might be like almost a parasite on Christendom, in the sense of you had this culture that was making these metaphysical claims about the universal like soul, and it was in, and even if you didn't buy the truth claims, even if you didn't believe in this Nazarene Jew coming back to life as the singular son of God, you still, even if you're like, well, that sounds like magical mumbo jumbo, but you were inculcated into this culture that had a bunch of claims in it, you know, and that we then start to take for granted, and then we start to throw it away, which feels like what's happening now, like a kind of no, it's all Ev psychology,
Mm.
actually. That's all just Ev psychology, and therefore I'm a smarty pants and I can sort of move past it. I'm being a little snarky, but I like there
Well,
is
there are
a
people who, I try not to be, but I
yeah.
guess I might come across to people watching that way, and I understand that. But that's always the case when we have a belief. And what's a
Yeah.
stronger, more important belief than that of God? I mean, bloody hell. Because if anyone who does believe in God, if that's suddenly switched off, that changes things very drastically. Suddenly that is not eternal bliss and eternal life. It's this one's ending, and it's getting worse already, and I'm gradually dying, and it's going to end. I mean, I don't know why we're not out in the street all screaming every day, going, "Oh my God, I'm dying!" We are, and I hope they cure death somehow, because I love being alive. I love breathing. I love touching and being, and I don't. That's. one way we try to put that off is all the books and literature and movies. The guy who wants to live forever is always the evil guy, like Voldemort in Harry Potter or whatever it is.
Right.
How dare he be so selfish as to want that? Future generations must come. Like, I don't even know those guys. They're not even born. Let me live forever. And that's a noble pursuit because I love life. I love life. And I've been given this amazing thing, whether by a higher power, as you might believe, or as for me, just mad random chance and I can't even explain it. Whatever it is, I'm here. I love it. And many of us do love it. And we want to be able to do that for a bit longer at least. God, 80 years is just not, it's nothing. So it's a panic, and I understand people don't want to believe it, and I understand that a guy like me coming and saying like, hey, I don't believe it. So that's why I'm very clear, like,
Yeah.
by all means believe it, and I wish I did. And I know that sounds patronizing, but I really do wish that I did.
What do you make of this meme in the podcast sort of verse of cultural Christianity and this that there was a time when this people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris were part of this new atheism movement that was quite vitriolic and was like, no, pay no attention to all the secular mass murderers of the 20th century. It's religion that's really the worst. I say that patronizingly because that's the way I feel, and I think
But
it's true.
you're right. You're right.
It's like I don't know how.
But they were religious, the Soviets, but in a different way.
Right, but in a kill God way. So it was like religious in a small R kind of sense.
Yeah.
But so new atheism was always a little weird to be in a post-Soviet early 21st century context. I didn't understand at that time why that would be the time to be like, yeah, pay no attention to Pol Pot. The real bad guys are those damn dirty Catholics. But that has now fallen out of favor to such an extent that you have people like yourself and like Brett and Heather and others who don't really want to be that person saying, I don't believe this. You're saying a truth claim that I think is nonsense. And I care about truth. So I should be like, no, if your animating principle is nonsense and I'm the cults guy, I don't like that. I should not do that.
Yeah.
But even in your unwillingness to be judgmental, I think it speaks to a shift that's happened.
You're right, because maybe I would be more willing to judge somebody going into the trans thing or into the everybody immigration thing, which I think are cults and beliefs based not on fact either, because I think they're more dangerous right now. Ultimately, I saw Dawkins quite recently, and I watched him on stage as well. He was debating with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who's become a Christian again. She's the ex-Muslim who had a fatwa against her.
Yeah, we've had Niall Ferguson here in the studio, so that's his wife. So I haven't met her yet. But,
I didn't even know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so and they had this great debate, and Dawkins's point was he agrees that cultural Christianity maybe is good and better than what is currently taking its place with wokeness. But he says, but why don't we lionize and champion logical thinking and rationality? And yeah, it got a bit of a condescending smile from the audience as well. Like, yes, idealistic,
sure.
A bit idealistic, because like kids are not going to, rational thinking, logical thinking, critical thinking.
We just need the pill that puts you squarely on the Asperger's spectrum, and you can join the team with the objectivists and libertarians and
but there are those
myself included.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed that kind of thing, and that's why I can't go for Christianity or Judaism or any of those. I just can't because of the rational thinking, and I do wish everybody could do it. Sometimes though, I'm happy they don't, because I wouldn't have a YouTube channel. What would I talk about? Like, hey guys, you all still being rational and logical? By the way, I don't mean to set myself up as a sort of the tsar of logical thinking. It's just that's what I try to be. I know people listening will go, but you haven't been logical even once, and that's fine. But at least it's good to have nutters in the world or crazy people who want to do horror, for journalists from a selfish perspective. But ultimately, the goal is, of course, to stop them doing it, and that's with Scientology journalists coming out. They have really helped to push that away, which is a great thing.
So, do you? Would you put me just fully in the you just belong to a cult that's not quite as bad as it used to be as a Catholic? You can be honest.
You're right that it's not as bad as it used to be, and it was bad. Because I think if you take any control group, if you make a group of people where others aren't allowed in and they have their own sort of law and their own, bad things will happen. And a lot of bad things, whether it's Judaism, Catholicism, Church of England, they happen like a lot, and those things are swept under a rug. So I do find them in that sense dangerous because they're humans. I suppose I think that you really don't want to. I think deep down inside you, and I'm just guessing, you know that it's not true, but it's so hard because I'm basically sitting here saying you've got cancer and you're going to die. That's what I'm saying to you by saying that, and you sort of know it. That's what I think's happening.
So, um, what's been interesting for me is that is how I used to feel.
Mm.
I used to feel like, well, I was raised Catholic and I'm 100% like Italian descent. So that's like the closest thing to a Christian Jew is to be like
Mm.
an Italian Catholic or maybe an Irish Catholic. So
Yeah.
there was like an identity thing, and we love our identities. We want to hold on to them a little. There's something valuable about our identity that's deep, it seems like.
Mm.
Um,
But you can be a Catholic, Italian, and you can have the culture of that.
well, and Italy has this. Italy, religion, I mean, we're here in America, we're sitting here in the United States. I think the United States is one of the most religious countries in the world.
Yeah, I
Like,
think
we're
so.
like as religious as Iran.
And probably because of what you just said, because a lot of people moved and they had to feel in touch, and then they had to be quite showy about it. Like, hey, I've left my old country, but I'm even more Catholic than you. I was in a taxi in England the other day, and this guy from Pakistan, a Muslim guy, I didn't tell him about my YouTube channel because he wouldn't like that. But he said like so many people came over to England and are even more religious, and that's why we have like these no-go zones that people talk about in the UK. I mean, in Pakistan, it's pretty bad. I mean, you hear some of the stuff that they do to girls and that has been done, and
Yeah.
it's atrocious. So the idea that it's actually more severe in the UK now is really worrying. But yeah,
Well, it's an interesting thing. The US, I think, right from the beginning was a place that misfits, religious misfits came, right? It's like the Pilgrims, the Quakers. It was like, they were escaping. We were like we have been religious asylum country for a long, long time. So
yeah,
even, almost all Italian Americans are a specific cohort. It's like we are the descendants of poor Southern Italians that came here at the turn of the last century. So that, we're like nothing like Northern Italians.
mm.
Like we're more like this sort of like bastardized Sicilian that's been gone through a couple wash cycles in the
Mm.
States. And we go back thinking, oh, I'm Italian. It's like, you're not, you're,
That's a quirk that you guys have. Like, I'm Italian, I'm Irish, I'm this, I'm that, and it's
it's like,
no. I
no.
don't know any other country where, and maybe that's a beautiful thing because you're in touch with your heritage. But I don't know any other country where people say, like, someone from Turkey is like, yeah, I'm just Swedish. Like, what do you mean you're Swedish? Well, my grandpa was Swedish or something. Like, that's not a thing. But I guess it's like it's the newer countries where that's still something. But and like I said, that's beautiful because you're in touch with your heritage. I don't even know who my guys were. Like, they were probably a bunch of horrible people creating me. I'm much taller than my parents, and nobody's addressed this. So I don't know who was, actually
there was some Vikings that made their way into that Ashkenazi mix and
yeah,
came back.
35 years ago.
The I think that just to touch on, your diagnosis of my heart for a minute, and then we can move on to other things. As I've gotten older, and as I've looked at the way the world has been responding to the decline of belief in God, it has shifted in me in deep ways that are now very much like the opposite of what you said. It's like I actually am all in on the truth claims, as crazy as they sound, about like the resurrection, about all of it. I actually think there's a profound magic in this world. I don't think it's in conflict with science. But the longer we live, the more magical the world seems to be to me. And I mean magical in the sense of like entering a door of mystery in which there's 1,000 additional doors, and it looks like that's the way the whole world works. Like, oh, we shrink down small enough, and now we've got particles that blink in and out of existence, or that respond differently depending on whether someone's looking at them or not. And so
Amazing.
So and maybe that is still ultimately God of the gaps, but the gaps are giant. They keep getting bigger. And then the social side of this seems like, oh, you throw that out and you're left with sort of materialism, and we're right back to tribal warfare. We're just right back to the worst form of of like the intersectional hierarchy stuff is all just, well, that is like ancient. That's just the
Yeah.
oldest kind of human organization to be like, I will judge you on the basis of what I can tell from across the room. It's like your face paint.
It comes from stupidity. It comes from I think I believe that I'm big on Hanlon's razor, never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. And I really do believe, like, so many people are quick. My brother, when I was a kid, I always remember he'd always just be like, he's a liar about whoever, and I was like, he's not lying, he's just wrong. People aren't always lying. In fact, we don't lie that much. We really I know it seems like on the news there's always some politicians lied. The reason it makes the news is because it's quite rare. We don't lie that much, most of us. Most of the lies are told by a very small percentage of people. And so, what was my point about that? What did you say before?
Well, okay, you're saying it's like it's
they're trying.
stupidity. Yeah.
I don't think it's a bunch of like evil, demonic people. I understand why you might use those words on social media, and Jordan does, and all of those things. That's not from looking at cults over the years. They all tried to help. Hitler tried to help people.
Oh, I agree with that.
Yeah, so that's what they're doing now, and it's just the new thing. The fashion changes every 30 years. There's always some way that they are victims and they need to rise up, and the only way they can do it is by telling themselves they're the good guys. So that's what's happening now. That's all it is.
I think you lay that at the feet of stupidity. It seems like the higher end of the IQ spectrum and the academics are the worst of them all, though.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So how is it? I would rather, on average, spend time with people who come across as anti-intellectual than what is now like the throw a dart in the room and you will hit a lunatic academia.
There's a middle point. There's like that bell curve, isn't there? There's a great book called The Intelligence Trap by a science writer called David Robson, and it's about the fact that intelligent people with high IQs, are actually more likely to be swayed by mad, crazy, magical thinking ideas. So a good example is the Sherlock Holmes writer, Arthur Conan Doyle. He used to believe in fairies, and that wasn't at a time when people believed in fairies. Like, because people think, oh yeah, but it was the 1930s or whatever it was. I don't know when it was. They didn't believe in fairies. He was like the one who was like, yep, fairies are a real thing, because he saw these pictures that these kids had done as a prank, and so he was like, well, that's proof. And they had a pin to put them up, like on the cardboard or whatever it was, that was around the navel. So they said, oh, he's got a belly button. Do you call it a belly button?
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seemed like one of those words that was too English and quaint. And everyone's going to love a belly button. And so he was like, that's proof that fairies can give birth, right? He's so smart. Like, I wouldn't have even thought that. He's too smart, and he's able to convince himself of these crazy narratives that there's nothing that he or one of these really smart people couldn't go for. Those intellects with super high IQs, even higher than ours, I don't think there's anything, no matter how insane, that you couldn't tell them, and they would find a way to make that seem real. And that's what's happening with the wokeness and the intellects, and they're just, they love it.
Jonathan Haidt has a model for this. He calls it the elephant and the rider, and he says that we have an intuitive cognition, intuitive intelligence, a sense that like, here's the right thing to do, here's the decision I'm going to make. That's the elephant. It's giant. It's going to move where it's going to move. And then we've got our IQ, our cognitive capability. That's the prefrontal cortex or whatever. That's the rider that pretends to be steering the elephant and sits there atop the elephant, proclaiming that the direction the elephant is going to go, whether it likes it or not, is here's the reason why we took this route straight through the jungle instead of on the road, because actually that was the more scenic route, or it was a little fast. Like, so it's all this ex post sort of PR for the belief that we were going to have no matter what.
Yeah.
Which is a weird, I think that's true. And it's weird because it's like, well, how the hell are we here? Well, like, how do we have technology? How does this work? The elephant didn't design this. So it's weird. We're like, there's like a dualism to our nature there.
I think it's ideologies, isn't it? Things that make us feel good about ourselves and things that give us excuses to do things that make us feel good. So I think technologies may be outside of that. That's just, people do that. They make better technology. They sell it. They make money. That's capitalism has driven technology. With regards to ideology, let's look at Hitler, because who can have a conversation without mentioning Hitler every 10 minutes? Godwin's law or whatever it was. He found himself in a position, or Germany did, where they were down on their knees. We completely screwed them after the First World War in a way that probably wasn't very smart to do. And we've learned not to do since, I think. We've defeated foes in war. They had nothing. They'd gone from being the big guys. That's another thing in the Status Game, great book by Will Storr. He talks about the biggest cause of you can't say the word on YouTube much, but taking one's own life is a dramatic and sudden drop in status, how you are perceived by people around you. Well, Germany as an entire country basically did that. They went from being like they are now in many respects, these very much admired and respected country at the top of everything, to being at the bottom on their knees. And they had to go, okay, I guess in that case, that's the elephant. Okay, something's happened here. Why are we like this?
Right.
Everyone screwed us over. Okay, it's the Jews. Now, if you're a really smart person, you can find any minority. I know Joe Rogan made this comment, which I don't think was right, but he can make a joke if he wants, that the Jews, he said, what, the Jews don't care about money? It's like saying the Italians don't care about pizza. But the fact was that the Nazis obviously cared about money, because for it to work, the idea that the Jews have all the money, the Nazis had to care a lot, even more about money to go and murder them. People go and murder people all the time about money. So, I mean, humans care about money. That's the point.
Yeah.
And so so the elephant was, why are we at the bottom now? Why do we feel that as a country like we want to kill ourselves? And okay, let's find these people. That's the rider, I guess.
It's you have an article on your Substack that was, about what exorcism taught you about gender ideology.
Yeah.
And so I think this is a good connective tissue into the thing that you've done a lot of journalism on, which is what's this. I do see it as a cult, very much so. Telling boys they can be girls and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But what did exorcism teach you about gender ideology?
I mean, the first thing is, I mean, exorcism is not real. There's no demons and all of these things. And I think even most people, I might be wrong, who believe in God and even believe in the resurrection and those kinds of things, very few of them actually believe in exorcism. And okay, you do. Have you seen it?
No, I like the Exorcist podcast, I will say.
Okay.
And I know the church is pretty good about, and you can pick this apart, that's fine, it's fun. As I understand it, the Catholic Church doesn't like to confirm things that sound crazy, and actually goes to great lengths to debunk.
Yes.
Often by using people like yourself.
Yes.
To be the leading debunker of claims, whether it's like Eucharistic miracles where the wafer becomes blood, like skin tissue, which has happened repeatedly and is bizarre, or the Shroud of Turin, or exorcisms. And there's so
it's just never been documented. That's the issue. It's never.
Have you listened to the Exorcist files?
There's never been anything unexplainable that I've seen, and I looked at a lot of stuff at the time. You've seen. I mean, obviously we have all the deep fakes now, but even years ago it was always possible to do. And in fact, The Exorcist itself was taken after a boy who later, I think, admitted. I'd have to check this out, but was found to have been faking the whole time. The movie, I mean.
I would be curious your thought on the Exorcist files. I mean, they're basically just dramatizations of this particular exorcist. I realize that you're like, this sounds like
dramatization. Yeah,
but I'm not an expert. I'm not prepared to defend it, other than like, pretty interesting.
If this was happening, like, I think what people fail to understand here when they look at atheists, and I'm just speaking on behalf of the atheists. I don't because I've elected myself, I've anointed myself. But also to say that I don't want to be one of those ones who's lecturing others. It's just, this is how I believe it. It's what you believe, and I think we're both fine. It's fine, and anyone watching, fine. What people misunderstand about most of us atheists, not the ones who just want to be right or whatever, is that we want to believe. We're not sitting there going, "Mwahaha, that's wrong, what a stupid thing." Most of us are going, "Oh my God, if exorcism was real, then God's real, and then I can live forever, and I can go to another realm, and God will bring me to heaven, and what an amazing thing! That would be better than like the best sex in the world, learning that." So I'm not sitting. So it's not that we're sitting there going, "Oh, no evidence is enough." It's going,
sure.
Please, this time be real. So if there was one case, just one, and it should be happening, by the way, if there are demons, that should be happening all over the world at once, all the time, right? They're not just, where have they gone?
It's an interesting, Jordan Peterson, who is I like a lot. He's sometimes impenetrable even for me.
Yeah.
I think the point he's been making more recently that I think is interesting is, well, what does it mean to be possessed by a demon if not to decide that you're going to mutilate yourself? Like, what is what like,
Mm.
and maybe this is shifting into like taking truth claims and calling them myth or calling them metaphor, but there is a certain kind of almost how should I put this? It turns out like causality is actually very, very difficult to prove
Yeah, but
in science. Like fundamentally, like even the notion that this causes that is a kind of fuzzy concept that is not.
what I would say to Jordan and to you now
Yeah.
is, and if I ever met Jordan, I'd say, Mr. Dr. Peterson, who I think is wonderful, but I would just say, okay, but then you've got to prove it exists. And that, like I said at the very beginning, I said it's not for me to prove that something doesn't exist. It's impossible. I've said this to trans advocates as well. They say to me, "Oh, but a man can be a woman because of something." And they say to me, "Why don't you think that's possible?" And I have to. And people do that. Colin Wright will talk about that. A lot of evolutionary scientists, but I think that's redundant. Okay, no. You've got to prove, and it's an extraordinary claim. It requires extraordinary evidence. If you can prove to me that a man can be a woman, and if you can even get past the first line of the ideology, which is Matt Walsh's "What is a woman?"
Yeah.
Okay, this man's a woman. What is that? And if they can't even go that far, they've not proved it. So with the exorcism thing, if you find yourself having to talk in circles and go, but what even is a metaphor? Maybe it's a metaphor and it's not a. No,
Yeah.
we are talking, when we're talking about exorcism, Dr. Peterson, we are talking about a demon, a very real demon
Mm-hmm.
that is inside someone's body and is coming. If you're talking about alcoholism and stuff like that, and you're saying maybe that's caused by the devil, that's a different thing. And I can say I don't believe in that, but I'm a little bit more open to that. But if we're
Sure.
talking about an actual demon inside you, because that's what the priest is doing, all that, and they're, I'm not having it. It works as a metaphor, and it helps people get better. That's the intriguing thing about exorcism. So placebo and all of those things, and that's amazing. They get better for a year or so, but then the underlying issues tend to come back.
So yeah. So flesh out that comparison and how your experience with observing exorcism, and I think this specific exorcist in
Hmm.
South America,
Yes.
how it transplants onto what's happening to our kids today in the culture and this gender ideology stuff.
We have something called the symptom pool, which has existed. Throughout time it changes. Whatever is fashionable at that time. So if a woman in the 1920s was depressed, she would be sent for fresh air. And told that she needs country air and those kinds, or that she might have some sort of wandering womb, which comes from ancient Greece, which is where the word hysteria comes from. Hysterical women, and like their womb is going up in their head, and they would use magnets to bring them down, and all sorts of crazy things like that. If you happen to be born in some parts of the impoverished suburbs of Argentina, where I went, and you have those kinds of issues, then you are told that you have a demon inside you. That is a very real demon, and we have to do all sorts of prayers and throw things at you and all the stuff to get it out so you feel better. In the West right now, if you go to a doctor and you have all of those conditions, you will be told, not necessarily immediately by the doctor, but by your friends, by the fashions of the time, that you are in the wrong body. There is something wrong with your body. This is unbelievably similar to the exorcism stuff in Argentina. In both cases, these are mostly, particularly young women, 15 to 20 years old, who are really struggling with who they are,
Mm-hmm.
with suddenly sexuality happening to them, like
Yeah.
happening to them, with the way men will gaze at them, which is something that happened, and then told that it's wrong to acknowledge. It's a really confusing time for any young boy or girl, but I think particularly girls with dealing with puberty and that kind of stuff. So that's a tough time. A lot of girls get anorexia, bulimia. Those, how
Yeah.
do you suddenly explain those things? Well, we don't know. And that's also the issue that I think people have with atheists. They say to me, well, what happened before the Big Bang? What happened with it? I don't know. We don't know. And humans are not built that way. We're built to know. We have to find that elephant and then find the reason why afterwards. So they were just so similar, the demographics of young girls in Argentina that I found and those in the West, that I thought this is no coincidence. We have a similar thing happening in it was Hong Kong with anorexia, for example. They didn't have the word. It wasn't even a thing. And then there was a high profile case about 20 years ago where a girl died from that. Again, I think it's that demographic of
Yeah.
young girls with these things. And journalists started looking at American and British movies, and they coined it anorexia. Suddenly that shot through the roof. Everybody had it. Social contagion. So you've got this age that's a very difficult age, and whether it manifests itself as anorexia, exorcism, transgenderism, wandering womb, basically what we're saying is this is really hard and we don't know how to treat it or what it is. Some sort of depression, who knows what, and that's it.
How do you understand the timing of this transgender hysterical craze? Because that's what it feels like. It feels like all of a sudden, in the past 5 to 10 years, we went from the world of the before times where, an SNL skit with a bunch of guys dressed like women
Mm-hmm.
would be like a joke, and it was like guys and dolls, and like really not much had changed about our perception of this. That yes, there's people who cross dress. Yes, there are some people who almost entirely male who feel they're only comfortable in this acting as if they are a woman,
Mm.
to 30% of Californians
Mm.
saying that they're LGBTQ, which is like impossible. And it's obviously different than in Idaho, so that's probably
Mm.
not really real.
Yeah.
It's cultural. But this all happened 5 minutes ago. This is like brand new, global, but especially seems like in the Anglosphere, in like America, UK,
Canada.
Canada, Australia, New Zealand seem to
Mm.
be particularly
Yeah.
afflicted by
Ireland.
this.
They love it. In Ireland.
So why? Why now?
Well, the feminists didn't help, and now and I don't like that. A lot of people get very bitter, and they'll say, "Well, you've made your bed. Look what you've done," that kind of thing. And that wasn't what the feminists wanted. But they went away from truth, which is they, for a long time, started saying that men and women are equal in every single way. And I've spoken to several feminists who were saying that at the time, who now say they regret that.
Hmm.
They say we shouldn't have said that. That wasn't true. We were trying to get parity, and what they were trying to get was equity. Really, they were not noticing the differences between the biologies, the biological difference of the sexes. They're just totally different, and there are similarities as well. But
Yeah, men and women are like two bell curves, but they're offset a little along lots of different dimensions, and it
yeah,
turns out that that's mostly the same.
yeah.
But where it's different, it's often different fairly dramatically.
The detransitioners that I've interviewed have given me a great insight into some of the biological and physical differences. So one of them was saying that when she took testosterone, she found she couldn't cry. Right. So I always thought crying, the reason men cry less than women, was because like a social construct, like men are told be a big man, women are told don't. But she was saying, no, just having the testosterone in me made me not able to cry. So there is something about our biology that makes one sex much more capable of crying. Not that men don't cry as well, of course.
Do Italians have low T then? Because like I'm like a blubbery mess.
Yeah, you were crying when I arrived.
No, but seriously though, I'm a pretty emotional guy, so that's interesting.
Yeah, but this is outliers, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
that. There's that meme, isn't there, of some people who don't get averages, and they say like the average height is 5'7", but I'm 5'9". That can't be true, But yeah,
Sure.
I try to cry, and I find that I so want to, that as soon as I start crying, I'm so happy that I'm crying that the crying
it ends.
It ends.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. The Larry David, the son of Larry David. Were you trying to do Larry David or not?
No, I
Came into Larry David. I liked it. But yeah, so the feminists didn't help, of course. I think students as well. That sort of the coddling of the what's Jonathan's book
coddling
called?
of the American mind, social media.
Quite-
I mean, a lot can be laid at the foot of social media for like the psychotic contagions we have.
Yeah, social media and well, just parents being told to tell their kids they're amazing. The other thing social media does is it allows you to see the whole world. Suddenly your tribe goes from being like the 20 kids at school. Well, maybe you're doing pretty well compared to the 20 kids at school or whatever. Well, social media and the internet, now you're competing with like the entire country. So you start off by your parents, everybody telling you you're the most wonderful, amazing person in the world.
Yeah.
You get to university, you realize that's not true. There's this, again, the book, The Status Game. I love this. Will Storr's book. It really resonated with me. Everything we do in life, pretty much everything, is done for status, to give us a better status. Our body, again, it's evolutionary biology, but it's that your body will incentivize you, so it feels good inside you. It actually feels good when you do something that will get you more status. It feels bad when you do something that will ruin your status. So lying or keeping secrets feels bad. It actually feels bad inside you because that's your body warning you, don't do this too often, you will lose status, people won't like you. Now, he says there are three main kinds of status. The main and best route is success. If you were the one who built the wheel or made fire, everybody's giving you food, acclaim, women, or if you're a woman, men, if they want that, I don't know. They don't seem to. And then all the things, you're getting all the things, shelter. But only a very tiny percentage of society can be successful because that's how success works. If everyone was, then the successful ones would be the ones at the top of that. So you can only ever have a small percentage of people who are successful. But everybody wants status. We all live for that. So what are the other ways? Well, one of them is dominance. That's what people call toxic masculinity now,
Sure.
right? But a lot of women exhibit those kinds of things as well, and a lot of men don't.
Yeah.
But
Women tend to be more socially aggressive and men more physically aggressive, but the
Yeah.
levels of aggressiveness, as I understand it, are pretty similar.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's just they're just
I will
different
punch you
ways.
in the face. If we're two women, I will spread horrible rumors that you are a
Yeah.
whore.
Well, that's
or something.
exactly that's the third type. So dominance is the second one, and it's obviously not as nice as success, but you can't succeed. Well, you're going to dominate, and you're going to bring down that head monkey, and you'll be the monkey in charge now. But a lot of women and a lot of men as well just are not naturally dominant. They're not physically built that way. They don't have it. That third way is virtue, right? So virtue signaling. If you were the guy in the tribe who showed how nice they were and was sharing all the food and so on, you would get more food and you would get more shelter and those kinds of things. The difference with the interesting thing about virtue is that you didn't have to actually be virtuous. You just needed to give off the impression that you were. So yeah, I'm giving everyone food all the time, but actually you're like keeping it for yourself. If you get away with that, you've done well. You're climbing the ranks. Anyway, you've got a huge generation now comparing themselves with the entire country who couldn't possibly be successful compared to like the top percentage, right? The 99% are nowhere near as successful. Yet they were told all by their parents because of the new way that we parent, the coddling of the American mind, that they are geniuses and brilliant, who suddenly find themselves at about 20 years old at university, utterly not interesting people, not successful people, they're probably not very, how do you be dominant in today's world? You can't really. All you have is virtue. And how do you get virtue? When you're in a world that has found some semblance of, as we were talking about before, equality. We were doing pretty well. We were getting there. So what do? You have to keep going and find that extra thing. What were the feminists saying? Oh, they were saying that men and women are exactly the same. Well, maybe they are. And that's how you do it. You're all a bunch of transphobes.
How do you know they're not right? Or more right than you feel like they are, to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
We've had, you've already brought up that there has been, even among the medical elite and experts, I mean, eugenics was considered like the premier science that everyone from, I can't say these people and not scowl, but Margaret Sanger and George Bernard Shaw, and all, I mean, like, it was the trust the science position, eugenics, in the United States, to such an extent that Hitler was like, oh, you guys got some good ideas over there. How do we know that the extent to which we claim our gendered nature, our sexual dimorphism is hardwired, that they don't have a point, that there isn't more fluidity than we feel like there is? Or like, is there, and have you found any part of this pro-gender fluid trans movement that you think has a healthy truth claim?
No, and I hate saying no because it's boring, and I want to be like, well, actually, the nuanced position is this. It's as I was saying with religion, it's a case of they have to prove it. This is about as extraordinary a claim as you can make. Like that man, you see that man over there, he's actually a woman. Let me tell you why. But I've never seen the why. What is the why? I don't know what that why is. It always seems to be, well, it's a social construct. And you go, yeah, but what? And that's a thought terminating cliche. A Scientologist would just say, yeah, suppressive person. This is a social construct. Explain what that means.
Wait, that I've heard this term, thought terminating
Cliche.
What does that mean?
That is something that cults use, and cultish groups, as I was saying before, any community. And I think that's a good sign of a cultish community is when you shout something out and it becomes a slogan. I suppose it's a sloganization of politics essentially, but it just means you no longer have to think because you've said the thing you're supposed to think or supposed to say, which is in Scientology, they would just say, so you're a suppressive person. That's it. You don't need to say anything more.
So woke is kind of that.
It is, yeah, it is.
Just
And,
like, oh, they're woke, so therefore
that's
they're
why
just
that's why they hate it when you say that. But you need to be able to explain it. So that's the difference. So suppressive person, okay, that's what Scientology was saying. You would then say, but why? Yeah, but engage with what I'm saying. So it is a thought terminating cliche, and I am guilty of it, of using it by saying you're just woke. But I wouldn't say that in an argument. I would try and say, I think you're being woke, and I'll explain why.
sure.
And so yeah, what was the one we were saying before? Is one? Well, I don't know, but transphobe is one of them.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I mean, racist, homophobes,
yeah.
all these things, all these isms that get thrown at people.
Explain it. Tell us why and what and what we've done, and then we can at least then have that debate, because otherwise we're just shouting slurs at one another.
I had this teacher, former teacher, Warren Smith on the show, because he had this really interesting exchange with a student that went viral and ultimately led to his termination. Not directly, but indirectly, where he basically had a student say, you know, J.K. Rowling is a bigot.
Yeah.
And he just Socratically asked him to work through and prove that. And by the end of it, the kid who said it was like, yeah, I guess that was wrong. I don't know why I thought that. I was not no. Like he pulled up her statements and read them, and then was like, well, what's bigoted about that? It's like, no, nothing's really bigoted about that. Actually, I'm not really. I don't know why people say, like, by the end, it's like, I don't know why people say that.
That's quite rare. Like, they don't usually do. I mean, people in cults, you can't usually get them out from the outside, as Warren was doing there.
Yeah. Well, he was just a high school student, so he wasn't
fully ingrained.
fully ingrained.
Yeah.
Do you? So there's nothing on the gender ideology side that has landed with you as being interesting, or because here's why I mean, it's an interesting question, but B, it does seem like we are at a point in like social norm, philosophy, politics that I'm inclined to think is true, but it also is convenient. And that is that the left, as we have understood it, has run out of gas. And what I mean by that is there's always been this tension between tradition, which is to say, let's keep doing the thing we've been doing because we've been doing it for a long time, and that's my justification. That's it. It's just, we're still doing it. Let's keep doing that. Why change? Change is bad. That's traditionalism. That's small c conservatism. Like, let's just not change. And then there's been the change people, who I would say would be like, so that's the right. This would be the left. The no, that's oppressive. That's bad. Here's the reasons why we should change what we're doing to something new.
Mm-hmm.
And at the most low resolution level, we should want both those forces always at work. That's like the pursuit of truth force. There is embedded knowledge in that a thing still exists, and so we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But sometimes we need to throw out the bathwater, and it's dirty, and we don't realize it because we've been swimming in it for so long. But that has tended to be the right-wingers and the left-wingers, broadly speaking. But now it's like at some point it seems like we crossed some Rubicon where the dynamic became like an autoimmune disease that no longer has the worms in its body to attack, and so it's attacking itself. And now the traditionalists are saying, no, we need free speech. And the forces of change want us to go back to pre-modern racial essentialism and thought police. And it's like, what do you guys have that's still worth pushing back on? Like, you won, and now you're going to destroy the society? Like, that's what it feels like to me. I know that's like a totally uncharitable position to take.
No, I think you're right. I think it's just, I think I'm hoping it comes in waves. And so that was maybe the right 20, 30 years ago, who wanted less free speech, less of it. And maybe that's a sign of the people who are in charge, inevitably, whether it's the right or left, are going to start trying to impinge upon people's free speech and people's freedom and people's thought policing. There was a lot of that, 30, 40 years ago. I still see that among what we call the gender realists. I mean, these sort of maybe a cultish group itself on Twitter and all of that. They have this motto in Britain: "Hold the line," and it means that they are really aggressive. And so a person who wears a dress is like fair game for them, or a person who secretly fantasizes about being a woman is like, that's a bad person. They're a fetishist. They're this. They're that. And it's a weird space now because these are not really right wing people. They're gender realists, but they're sort of feminists, aren't they? I mean, that's what a TERF is, isn't it? They're sort of lefty feminists, but they're very aggressive in that way. It's getting harder and harder to place all these sort of intersections. I don't know what they are, but that's where I see thought policing. Because
Mm-hmm.
quite frankly, if some guy thinks he's a woman, what is that to me? Providing they're not going into women's spaces, providing they are not playing sports with them, which is insane, going into their prisons when they go, like those things are mental. It's unbelievable we've allowed that to happen. But if somebody actually, just some guy thinks they're a woman or whatever, like, well, I'd hang out with that person, I'll have a drink with them, providing. The issue is really though, and they have a point to an extent about that thought policing aspect, which is that I spoke to a doctor a couple of days ago about who dealt with detransitioners and stuff, and he said a great percentage of these people who are trans, it is a fetish. And they're often not aware in themselves that it is a fetish. Some of them are autistic, some of them are struggling with being gay, but there's a huge part of them who are fetishizing because often trauma happened in their life, something to do with their mum or dad or who knows what. A lot of them are cosplaying at being their mothers. He was saying, look at the hairdos and all of these kinds of things. They're not trying to look like, they look like their mums. They look like these weird kind of, 1970s mums.
Yeah, it's the, it's like you have we all end up eventually looking like Angela Lansbury, like Paul McCartney, heartthrob. Now it kind of looks like Angela Lansbury.
I don't know who that is, but I know what Paul McCartney looks like.
Yeah, well, this is
Yeah, Rod
cross,
Stewart. Rod Stewart's got a similar look.
Rod Stewart. You get the jazz. Suddenly you look like my Aunt Rita.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
And trans people often try to go that way.
So you have written about and looked at that this has become a place for child predators to hide.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
And it's hard to do so because you don't want to appear like those who said that about gay people a few
Yeah, I mean, we had
Andrew Doyle.
And had a great conversation, and I just sort of laid my own like increasing discomforts that are about this. I was like, oh no, this is all me, and I'm a pretty like liberal guy, but I'm like,
yeah,
I don't know about any of that.
It's just
So what's going on?
There was someone I interviewed the other day, Kerry Lee Galvin, and the video's done well. People are just amazed by this story, and she's brilliant. But her dad was abusing her whole childhood. Right? They had like, I can't remember if it was 6 or 7 kids. There was like a lot of kids there, maybe 8. She was one of many kids, and she was the one though that the dad just took to and just like the whole time. Horrible thing. Eventually, he gets found out and arrested, sent to prison, and she's finally free of him. And then she gets a call, I don't know how much later, but maybe a couple of years later. Hello, just very matter of fact, just so you know, your dad has given us permission to share with you that she is now a woman. And she was just gobsmacked, this Kerry, because Kerry said, this is not a woman, this is somebody who abused me for years with the very thing that makes him a man. So this is disgraceful. And really, just even for them to call, even to indulge this man, but they did, and they gave him makeup and hair and all of these things.
In prison.
Yeah, which taxpayer money, and women don't get that. So this is yet another example in the whole trans thing where they are not trying to have rights that like trans rights are human rights. They want extra rights that others don't have, and we're giving it to them. I don't know why that is. So he was getting his hair and his makeup and separated from most of the rest of the community, not in a solitary confinement way, but in a nice way, given more space, given everything, and eventually released early. And she believes very strongly it's because of that, because he started saying that because of his issues with trans, that's why he did the abuse. It was all basically an excuse. Now, the issue now is background checks in the UK, and I don't know how it works exactly in America, but it's the same in Canada. I know that when you get your criminal background check, if you change your name, you don't necessarily have to have your old stuff. Now, I don't know exactly how that works, but I do know that when you change your sex as well, You get a brand new birth certificate, so there's no trace of the former you. A new birth certificate, like 30 years after your birth, which is insane in itself. So
You're born again.
you're born again. Well, this is why I worry about both of these ideologies. But you're born again now. You suddenly, you know, he was always a woman, and all of these things, and he can go into libraries and parks and schools and do whatever he wants, and nobody will see any hint that he was once someone else. He is just this trans woman who's a victim, and he has now been spotted. She's been getting messages from people. Oh God, I just saw him. He was in the library sitting next to all these children. He's doing all these sorts of things. Now, people, when I put that out, went crazy at me, like woke people, saying, "Oh, that's not true. You have to declare your former criminal, whatever offences." And that's true. You have to declare your criminal offences, but voluntarily. I mean, the people who are not probably likely to do that are criminals, particularly this guy. So you're supposed to do it, and it's a criminal offense not to do it. But no one knows because you're the new guy now, or in his case, the new woman. So there's no way he voluntarily put, and I did all this horrible abusing on his thing. He'll take the criminal, like the chance that they'll find out, and they won't find out. So you can now get away with it, and a lot of people are apparently, we've lost in the system. This was between 2019 and 2021 in the UK. We lost 800, I call them on YouTube PDF files so we don't get caught. We lost 800 of them just because they've changed names. We don't know where they are, who they are now. Done, gone.
800.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is interesting about our political moment is that it does seem like cultification has happened on all sides. And I'm not so much a pox on both their houses kind of guy. But, you know, we have in this country, it's died down. People don't talk about that much in the past, let's say, year. But this movement called QAnon, right? Mm-hmm. You've heard about this.
Yeah.
And among the things in this QAnon discourse has been like Pizzagate and like...
No. All this stuff's getting
PDF
your channel
files,
taken down, by the way.
All
that Q thing, you might want to blank Q. Because I mentioned that, and the video was like, you know, destroyed, and like...
Good to know. We might even edit this little exchange out, but also flag the thing.
Yeah.
So we'll but there is this, so it's an interesting place you're occupying because you're looking at this issue, the PDF files it's also associated with and obsessed over by people often on the right who you could call cultish, you know, who think this is everywhere. But then again, we do have the Epstein situation. So, and Puff Daddy and like it's like actually like there's a lot of really gross, horrendous behavior at the highest levels of our society, and there always has been. So how do you actually think about knowing what is the magnitude of a problem like this, given it's you know, you're focusing your attention there, but you're also a truth seeker that's skeptical about conspiracy theories and cultish behavior. So how do you think about the scope of the problem of this sort of legitimately like scary, evil, grooming, child predation?
Well, what we know, it's thought that 1% of men have the condition, let's call it. And this is often, I looked into this for 2 years in Germany because they have a something called Don't Offend. It's a clinic that's state sponsored, and it's the only one in the world that doesn't have mandatory reporting. So one of these people with a condition can go to the therapy and hopefully get help. I actually think it's a good idea. Germans tend to be behind it, but it's controversial because it means that they're going in, talking to doctors, and the doctors are not reporting them to authorities.
Right.
But the flip side is, but they wouldn't come in. At least we're getting them in. It's something. It's like, it's so hard to stop them doing that, and it's something. You get them in, and you can try and use therapy and help them and make them not offend. And if you stop them from offending of one child, you've done something remarkable.
For sure.
So it's thought that 1% of men have that condition. Oh yeah, I was going to say, Rogan again recently was talking about it, and he says he doesn't understand. There's a lot of controversy around people use words like MAP or whatever. Have you heard that, mine?
Yeah. These these dolled up words for the
Yeah,
for,
it's thought people think it's to give legitimacy to these people, but I think what it's really trying to do, and maybe not that well, they're trying to differentiate between the people who have the condition or the thoughts or the intrusive thoughts, whatever it is, an illness, I don't know, uh, and those and those who have it and actually offend, because there's a world of difference. I get in a lot of trouble when I say this from the right. They deliberately misinterpret what I'm saying, and then they start saying like these mad things, like, "Oh, right, just because someone has horrible thoughts about kids, and just because they don't offend, you give them a different word." I'm like, yeah, well, that just because they don't offend that's a weird just, because that's a pretty huge line to cross. It doesn't mean you can't be critical of both, but I think we do have to separate what they are. Those
yeah, that
ones.
is I mean, behavior. It's like, well, what are we going to sort of prosecute pre-crime now? It's like that's like saying speech is violence.
I know.
No,
Yeah, that's what I
violence
think.
is violence. Crime is crime. Thoughts are thoughts.
But as you know, I mean, this is people, and people
Yeah.
in groups want to.
I mean, I understand it. It's like disgusting.
It's the
It's
worst.
horrified.
It's the worst thing that can happen. And this is Dad Saves America. Kids.
Yeah.
It's the worst. It's the worst thing, and I can't be clearer about that. And I think,
Yeah.
unfortunately, because we're emotional, we don't think about the best way to actually stop them doing it. Everybody always says, "Look, just lock them all up." It's like, yeah, I know, but where are you going to find them? How are you going to get them? You can't. Okay, what's the next idea? So it's like when I say with trans, okay, let's look at the ideas. Explain to me your better way of doing this, and they can't find it. Just lock them up. What you're saying is wait for them to act and do something to kids. That's horrible. So I quite like what the German clinic's doing and saying it puts out adverts everywhere and says, "Come to us. You're anonymous. Come and see us. We'll talk to you." Because if you don't, those guys just talk to themselves, to each other on the internet, the
Yeah.
dark web,
Mm-hmm.
and they convince one another it's fine to do what they do. That's what they tell each other. I've seen it. They tell each other, "Oh, it's fine. I knew this kid. It was fine. Happened to me when I was a kid. It was fine." They don't realize. So when they go to the therapy's primary job is to disabuse them of that idea. To say, no, no, no.
How effective is this therapy?
They'll never know, because you'll never. They don't collect the data of the people they have, so they can't ever know if they've gone on to offend. That's the bad part of it. It's
So,
run on theory, but the alternative is don't run it.
so it's yeah. That is a really interesting case. I'm just thinking about it. So you have this situation where you have a behavior that is absolutely disgusting and evil.
Mm-hmm.
You have people who we will only find out that they've done it after the fact by committing the act.
Mm-hmm. So all we can do is get them in
This does.
before the act.
So one of the things that we were talking about equality earlier, and so much of this conversation is actually just about different ways of thinking about ideology functionally.
Mm.
Um, how do you think about human nature? Because one of the things it looks like is you have this liberal Western ethos,
Mm.
which is equality. And let's have equality under the law, which is a very particular way of thinking, which is to say, look, we will treat everyone as if they're a kind of blank slate, and have the rules apply to their actions, and that's it. And wokeism violates that by trying to bring in identity into the picture, and any kind of attempt to suppress free speech tries to do that by trying to prevent thought before it turns into action, which is not workable either. But it leaves you in this place that is hard, which is okay. Equality under the law, great. But it does seem like we've got this distribution of these different percentages of humans
Mm.
who aren't like the rest of us, who are wired differently in ways that can be dramatically more destructive than the average. They're like black swan people. They're the mass murderers. They're the child predators.
Mm-hmm.
These are not the same person. So yes, equality under the law says we'll treat every human as the same in the eyes of the law. but at what point is there and you could even say this is getting like taking Herbert Marcuse seriously about like the tolerant society that tolerates everything might in fact tolerate the forces of its own destruction.
Certainly.
How do you think, and we can touch on immigration in this part of our conversation, but how do you think about that? Because I haven't grappled with that in a way that's like, I don't have some answer to that question other than I think the degradation of social norms. This is what's making me kind of more Catholic as I get older. It's like, well, like shame is good. I like shame. We're killing shame and replacing it with equality under the law. And it turns out like equality under the law maybe really only functioned when you also had shame. So giving nice anodyne names to a thing that's shameful might actually be a net negative and make the whole system unravel under the weight of its contradictions.
Well, yeah, I'd say that I'm probably against the death penalty. Most Brits are. You won't find a Brit who's pro
Yeah, I'm
death
against the
penalty.
death penalty.
But, but,
Except maybe for the people we're talking about.
well,
It's really
look,
hard. It's like, oh man.
the reason most people are against death penalty, I think, well, many people are, is because of the philosophy of we're taking a life. Whether you're religious, that's God's job, or whether you're not religious, who is it? Who am I to take a life? I think the reason that really is the most convincing for many of us, I'm sure for you as well, is that we'll never be completely sure that we've got the right person. It's so hard to know. I think 10% of people in prison are thought to be wrongful convictions, right? So that's the issue with the death penalty. If there were a way to be a billion% sure this guy a child, I think, and I think most people would actually just go, yeah, you've sacrificed your right to have this life. We don't want you in our society.
Yes.
We can either kill you or we put you on an island with all the rest of you guys, and we're good, done, out, finished. You shouldn't be in our society with us. So maybe that's not compassionate. Some people might say, I don't know. And yeah, murdering. But then this is a problem because it wasn't really a murder. He was sort of self-defense, or was it? And we've seen how those go.
Nuance creeps in very, very quickly.
Yeah, that's the problem with it. But I'd say they do have different rights. Typically, I know that particularly in America, after they've been, I mean, most of them a lot of these guys go to Coalinga. It's like a place in California, I think it is, or somewhere in California. Louis Theroux did a documentary about it. That's one of the big institutions where the guys who've committed crimes against children go, and most of them never see the light of day. They never ever get out again, and it's an interesting documentary with Louis Theroux because you see them going to like their parole meetings and things like that. They'll go and can I get out? And it's like, no. Again, it's like that Shawshank Morgan Freeman bit.
Yeah.
Every 10 years or so, and they don't ever get out. Like one in like 10,000 of them does get out, and they get put in these sort of halfway homes that are modest.
Yeah, and you're on a list, and you can be, and people can find you on the registration.
That's it. So they don't have the same rights. They're not allowed to live within a mile of a school, and blah blah blah. It depends on the state, I think, and depends on the country. I'm not sure that we have such strong rules in the UK, but we certainly should do. So yeah, I would say that I would agree with you that these people who have done these things shouldn't have the same rights as the rest of us.
But do you? I guess to restate the question, do you? How do you contend with the possibility, with what I think might be a fact, that we can't really fully apply a very simple reductionist equality under the law mindset with some of the level of destructive behavior that humans can do? That we have to actually do that. Like that's a different treatment. You're getting a particular treatment because of what you are that's different than other people.
It's just that you've got to find out, you don't find out that they're different until they've done the thing. And at that point, you do treat them differently. You take away their liberty, you put them in prison. Those PDF files don't go for long enough. I've never understood that. I don't know in whose interest that is. I've never understood who's voting for that. Like, oh, those guys should go for less time than people who've committed like tax fraud.
It's ironic because I think just totally accidentally, my wife was actually looking at one of these registries to see who's in the neighborhood. Just last night. I don't know why this was happening. It was actually kind of weird. She didn't even know we were talking today.
That's a right to privacy that they don't have anymore. And
right.
That's right.
The one of the things that you touched on was this the immigration issue. And in Europe, and you sort of said it somewhat off the cuff that like there's no Scandinavia anymore, or Ireland or Scotland, or like that immigration is transforming these places. it's the biggest issue in our country politically right now.
Well, imagine if that immigration debate that you're having in the States, if it wasn't Latinos and it was radical Islamists. Imagine how much more fiery that would be, and how much more scared and angry people would be. That's what we're contending with in Europe right now. I mean, I would bite your hand off for Latinos coming to these. They all would. Please, Latinos come instead. Not, and I don't mean to be cruel to all Muslims. Of course not. You know, most are,
Yeah,
but there are stats around beliefs that are quite high, particularly from Pakistani and Afghanistani Muslims, many of whom come to the UK. It's 1.2 million. It's a small island. 1.2 million per year at the moment are people in total, and immigrants are coming in, and a high percentage of those people are Muslims. And if you allow any group of people, and the same in the States, the same issue you've got, to come that quickly, there's no time to adapt to the new culture, and there's no incentive. And what I would always say, if you want to have an argument with a woke person, you have to invert this. So what I will say is, before even talking about immigration, I'll talk about how sad it is that so many English people go to the south of Spain and ruin it, because they all go at once. None of them learn the language. None of them get it. They change all the names to English things. They put English pubs everywhere, but really tacky ones. And every woke person in the world, because they are the liberal elite and look down at the working classes who are taking over Spain and making it into their sort of party island, will say, God, that's awful. A similar thing is like a friend of mine who's Colombian. He's anti woke and he lives in England, and he was saying that he would always say to these woke people how awful it is that all the English come to Colombia, the Americans come to Colombia, they don't learn the bloody language. And so everyone's, oh, that's awful, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, isn't it awful when they come to the UK and also don't learn the language? And then they have to admit, and they go, oh, I guess so. Maybe it is nice to have social cohesion and people in your country who speak your language and share your values. Now, that we've seen over centuries that does happen if you allow, and you know, groups, the Jews, the Russians, the whoever, the Greeks, the East Asians, they do tend to, okay, they have their little pockets, they have their things, but they tend to sort of adapt, and that can enrich the society. But if you're like, when I went to live in Argentina, if there had been suddenly like 30% of the country or 20% of the country was English, why would I have learned Spanish? Why would I have done all the Spanishy Argentine things that they do? I just wouldn't, because maybe I would have wanted to. Maybe I'd have felt like, oh, I really wanted, but I'm just going to hang out with Dave and Adam or someone today. So that is an issue. It doesn't mean that you have to dislike Muslims or dislike Latinos or dislike anyone. It's that you like how your country is because you grew up in it and you're a product of it. And the reason that so many people come to America and to the UK and to Sweden and to Ireland is because there's something about this culture that's quite attractive, even to people outside of that culture. They all want to come to these countries, so they're doing pretty well. But if you have them come that fast, they're not going to lose their own culture, which, you know, that's a big debate in the UK. Are some cultures better than others? And again, the sort of woke side, the lefty side, everyone in the Labour Party is all saying, well, oh, that's racist to say that some cultures are better than others. And everyone's going, what about the Taliban? Is that culture's equal with ours? Are you kidding me? And these people are coming from those countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, many of them. They're not going to leave their beliefs and cultures at the door. And previously, they would have come over at a slow enough rate that they would have maybe had those ideas at first and hopefully fallen in love with the country and had kids who were then very much English and spoke with English
yeah.
accent and so on. That is no longer happening because the speed is so vast. I mean, I was just watching on British Airways the other night, British Airways, and half of the film options are in Urdu and various other languages, about half of them sort of Indian, Pakistani languages. The food options were all Indian, Pakistani. You had three choices between that, which I love that food, but it's not ideal for a long haul flight, right? For various reasons. You end up with queues, everyone's going to the toilets. So who is it trying to satisfy? So the idea that it isn't changing things is absurd. It's patently happening in front of our eyes. It's just whether you want that or not. And if people want to make the argument that they want Ireland, this beautiful green country, with loads of countryside, to be actually filled with more and more people, many of whom are from countries where this is happening. There's a word, something like, I think it's MENCAP or something. It's the acronym for sort of the various countries, Pakistan and all of those countries. The crime figures in Scandinavia are insane, how high they are among people from those regions. Whereas we're not having the same thing with people from Ukraine and Poland, people coming from there. You're seeing it directly with those people. Ireland, though, and the UK don't take figures of crimes committed according to race because they don't want this to come out. So, yeah.
There's I have this is a challenging issue on a bunch of fronts for me. Partly because it's like my libertarian inclinations are such that and being an American and being like an Americans, we say things like I'm an Italian. It's like no, you're not. You're an American.
Yeah.
So I think we've generally had a very pro-immigration culture, even with all the discomfort with it, even with the fact that whenever immigration rates get high, there's a backlash like every time. First with the Chinese, then with then the waves of Irish and Italians, and now with central Mexican, Central and South Americans, and more and kind of everybody, because it's like the immigration situation here is kind of a wreck. But in general, I've been very pro-immigration.
Mm-hmm.
But the culture problems are getting harder and harder to navigate on this front, because it's like, well, what is too, like, the metrics here for too fast, too slow, what's the just right, who decides? There's not like an obvious answer to these questions. And then it just seems really weird that our political leadership is like the answers coming out, like the UK in particular. You've had like a long run of Tory leadership,
Yeah.
and this happened under the right-wing Tories.
Yeah. When
So like, how do you understand what is happening at the political level here of this thing that if it's way too high, and why are they doing it? Why are they letting it happen?
You remind me of when I first met Peter Boghossian, right? He's become quite a good friend now. He's what a character he is.
Yeah, I like Peter a lot.
So he came sort of storming into this room we had rented to film. Didn't even say hi and just sort of sat down. I hadn't met him before, and he's like eating a sandwich, and I was like, "Hello." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm early. I'm just a bit early." And I go, "Okay, you okay? And how are you doing?" He's like, "This country's fucked. It's just gone. It's gone. It's all finished." And because there'd been like a pro-Palestine rally outside the building.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, but well, it's not my fault, Peter." He was like, "You voted for this. You voted for this." And I said, "No, I didn't." And we had the Conservative government in charge the whole time. I think this was started in the UK by Tony Blair in the 90s, the Labour Party. It was New Labour. It was all very exciting, and it was, we're going to let immigrants in. I don't know the exact numbers, but it was like 20,000 a year, and everyone was like, "What? That's a huge number." But okay, this is New Britain. We bring the brightest and best, and so on. It felt okay, but the gateways were opened at that point, and now we're at 1.2 million. Which is in a small island with no space. And people say, "Oh, look, there's space. There's a field over there." It's like, yeah, but we need to have some fields. We have to have some grass. That's what people come to England for. And it is a shame. I know loads of immigrants who've come over who love England. And those people, yeah, come and be part of our country and be part of what you loved about England growing up. You know, everyone grows up and has a favorite country. Maybe it was America or England or whatever, and they want to go and be part of what that is to them. And what a shame for them to see what's happening to it from other immigrants, from just this massive, from it changing so fast before their eyes. Loads of them have said to me, "God, I when I came over, I was so excited," and I've seen just in the last few years. And I don't want to just, I'm wary of sounding too sort of, the word is Islamophobic, which I think is also a thought terminating cliche. I mean, it's about a belief system. It's not a immutable characteristic. There's no concern about Sikhs and Hindus who do adapt really well to the culture. So it's not about skin color. No one cares. They're great and they're part of it. And we all love an Indian curry. And they're part of the cricket team. We all play together. It's great. There is a problem with Islam at the moment. And I agree with you about the individual liberty and stuff, but these are not things that they believe in. This is a very right-wing fundamentalist religion, and it's a very scary one for a lot of people, particularly for the Jews. But I mean, it shapes our politics. It shapes whether we will continue giving aid to Israel, for example. Now, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't, right? That's another thing. But that shouldn't be shaped by an inordinate number of people coming into the country just in the last few years. This is frighteningly fast. They also have much higher birth rates. And I don't know how we stop it now. I mean, Peter was actually saying to me half in jest, but he said, "I think you should just give up. Like, England should give up, give them the country, and just come to America. We've got some space.
Come to Texas."
Yeah, you take. He said, "We got loads of space. We can take."
Texas is Western civilization 3.0.
So, he said, "We'll take. We will put 40 million Brits. Fine, we'll take you. That's fine." And I thought, yeah, I guess you guys wouldn't mind it. I think you prefer that.
No problem.
Yeah. Whereas the Latino thing you've got going on, because I speak Spanish, I quite like it because I get to show off my Spanish all the time. But it's honestly, and I know why people are upset, because you grew up in America. This is America. This is what it's supposed to be, and it's going to change, and it has changed, and that you can't stop it, and that's in many respects quite sad.
It's a very there's so many things about this issue, and they intersect with a lot of our conversation too, because it's like you have the weirdest political coalition that's taken shape.
Mm,
So a set of things, like you go into one of these pro-Palestine, from the river to the sea crowds
yeah,
on an elite university like Columbia here, or probably Oxford and Cambridge. And okay, here's the set of things these people are holding on to. That culture, judging cultures is, how dare you judge cultures, except that also we're going to judge culture, and specifically, Western civilization, as being particularly horrible,
yeah, white people.
and white people,
Yeah,
or something. And oh, Britain, oh, you're the worst of the worst. You're the British Empire. You're the colonialists.
yeah.
Oh, how dare you? How dare you lead the world in ending slavery after all of human existence?
Well, that exactly. Well,
I mean, it's like,
not to
pick up
mention
a book.
not to mention the biggest colonialists. I mean, the Islamic political Islam. Like the idea that they don't. It's that sort of white exceptionalism, isn't it? That we would call racist. That they think only white people would be strong and brave enough to colonize. Islam has done it everywhere, but everywhere it's done it, Jews and often other have had to leave. And Dr. Gad Saad put these diagrams up showing like Jews leaving the surrounding countries, so they're only now left in Israel, and no one seems to care.
Right. It's like people think so you have, okay, so you have the all cultures are equal and believe in indigenous peoples for some reason. Whoever, I don't know when you start being indigenous exactly,
Yeah,
but at some point you get to say, no, I'm indigenous now, unless you're English,
yeah.
in which case, no, you're not allowed to be indigenous
It's a good
anymore.
point. That's
So
a good point.
like there was a of this politician, I think in Scotland, that went kind of viral for.
Hamza Yousaf.
Yeah, and so he gets up, he's like, all of our ministers are white, white, white. It's
Do
like
the accent.
you're in Scotland.
Can you do the accent?
White, what?
He did a what, didn't he?
He
It
did
was
a
a lot of
white,
sort of
white.
posh
The minister
potted.
of something, white. The minister of education, white.
Yeah.
It's like, you're in Scotland.
Yeah. It's like going to the Arctic Circle or something. Snow everywhere. What is going on in this place?
It's all white. It's like,
There's snow here.
So okay, so indigenous is good unless you're in the British Isles. Believe every, you know, men and women don't mean anything. That's all a social construct. But race, which is actually mostly a social
Yes.
construct, is immutable, and like you must treat people on the basis of the level of melanin in their skin, not the content of their character or their behavior or their culture.
Yeah.
Even though that's like the genetic differences between people with different races is like non-existent and very highly negligible, whereas like sex is super hardwired down to every aspect of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then but now we're going to be for the palace, for Hamas,
Yeah.
and for the surrounding region, and against the Jews because they're white, even though most Israelis are actually like from the Arab states that surround them, which actually expelled literally all of them.
Yeah.
So there's no Jews in Iraq or Iran or any of these other, like, so they did all the ethnic.
Yeah.
I don't understand. I know I'm going on just like a kind of rant, but there's like a multi-headed Hydra cult that's simultaneously contradicting and killing itself, yet all exists together. And then that whole group is in a weird seeming marriage with parts of the Islamic world.
Yeah. It's called Islamo-wokeism is what people are coining it. The Islamo-woke.
Right. And you know, about a year ago, I did a video essay about the reactions to 10/7. I am, you could call me a Jew lover if you want, but I have a lot of affinity for the Jewish people I have a lot of Jewish friends. I have people that are family members. But leave that aside. The fact is, before anything happened in the aftermath of 10/7, like on 10/8 and 10/9 and 10/10, the protests took to the
Yeah.
streets around the whole Western world by our high IQ, uh, urban,
Yeah.
I don't know what you'd call these people. They're not liberal, but elite young people.
It's the elephant and the rider. They made it all fit.
How did it
But
all? But how? How does that
well,
all fit?
look, it's happened before, and that's what that's the scariest part about it. Because I would otherwise think maybe I'm being over the top in worrying about this, but this has happened. This happened in Iran. Iran was really secular. Women had free rights. I mean,
Yeah,
you see photos and videos of Iran, like
1950s.
oh my God, like
Yeah,
they're having a great time. The left teamed up with radical Islam, got them into power, and then the Islamists killed all the left. This happened in Lebanon. This version of this is happening in Turkey. This political Islamism and the way it's spreading and colonizing and using the left's own sort of fake empathy against itself. So we're seeing it in the UK. Why would it end up in the UK any different to how it did in those places?
I had an experience this year, um, with with a friend
Mm,
who's a Brit. Um, I won't say his name now,
mm,
but it became we were having this back and forth about a video. He's like the embodiment of this in ways that I don't understand, and he stopped communicating with me over things that I don't. That's even weirder,
yeah.
actually. He emailed me saying, "Hey, I want to criticize you about one of your videos where you were sort of mocking Ibram X. Kendi and a
Oh,
couple of these sort of race essentialist grifters,
yeah.
because I think that they're disempowering and trafficking in evil,
Mm,
evil for the kids and people that they claim to care about. Like victimhood is the pill you take to destroy, the pill you hand out to destroy people's lives, especially young people, especially kids."
yeah,
Um,
I agree.
in the back and forth. So then we started getting this like back and forth. I thought he was like play acting like a wokester, like a super intersectional critical social justice type, and I was having a blast. And then he went on a tirade about the real answer is Islam,
Oh, wow.
and I was like, wait, are you? Wait, are you being serious? And it turns out he had converted to Islam,
It's invasion of the body snatchers.
and so he likes Ibram X Kendi, and he sees this fusion of this like you could just call it like brown victimhood cult thing.
Yeah,
That seems like an ally. But he also says like, oh well, yeah, but we'll still destroy them in the end because Islam has to. So he has sent me texts that are like, I should probably submit this to the intelligence agencies.
wow.
And and I'm like, what is happening? It was like a win. So I had this back and forth with him over like 6 months because it's like I I have a rare opportunity with somebody to actually have a discourse. And we had like a lengthy one. And there's some parts of it I even agree with. Like I think a lot of our culture's gotten to be frankly like degenerate. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
like
Well,
I
look,
think there's a lot of stuff that's gross. I think the sexualization. I think this a lot of stuff we're talking about, both religiously, but even just as a humanist. Leave aside Christianity or any of that. The innocence of children is good, period.
mm,
It's simply good. Protecting kids from inappropriate behavior and ideas, giving them a foundation in the things that have built this civilization are good.
I agree.
And yet this allyship has emerged and it's taken over our campuses and it's taken over the places that we used to aspire our kids could get into. So how do you understand that?
We need another however long it's been, don't we, to go into that, the whole Islam thing.
But I mean, it's like a multi-layered cult thing that's happened.
It, I just think kids show off and that we've enabled them and empowered them and that politicians want to, I don't even know. They've just fallen for it. They've taken the Kool-Aid That's what's happened in Ireland. I did an interview with someone from Ireland about that recently. If you imagine, I mean, the 1.2 million in England, I don't know the exact figures in Ireland, but a lot of Irish towns and cities only have like 5,000 people in them. So in one day, 1,000 immigrants will be there. New people to the society who don't speak the same language, don't have the same culture, who hang around in gangs and look intimidating. Well, suddenly the 20% of the town suddenly has that. From having never had that in their history in Ireland, suddenly they do. I don't know. I don't know where we go. I don't know how seriously to take Peter in saying we should just give up and hand the country to Islam and leave. And it's too late and we start again somewhere. Really, you'd have to give away the whole of Europe, though. And that's it.
Um, I came across a video.
Hmm.
It's probably a reflection of my changing consumption, and which argued bombastically
Hmm.
that our history books have gotten the Crusades all wrong. That at
Ah.
least the first Crusades were the protection of the Western world. And I don't know how to think about this kind of thought, but
Hmm.
there's something happening here that it's like it, like our how it's asymmetric warfare.
Hmm. I don't know enough about the Crusades, but there's definitely a rewriting of history going. I mean, there's all the Churchill stuff and all that.
But like I like what you're describing to me is a circumstance that I don't think the world you and I were born into has prepared us for, really. Like the Western world, like one side seems to be engaged in a kind of combat, and I don't know what to do about like
Hmm.
that. I don't know how to think about what comes, like abandoning your country and just coming to Texas and letting it turn into um you know a different place. That doesn't that's isn't that
Well,
not
of
how
course,
humans used to do that? Didn't we do
of
different
course, yeah.
stuff?
Well, look, then they'd come, then we'd all be in America and they'd come here.
But then
Look,
that suggests like we're in like a religious war, planetary wise, which I really don't want to believe, but maybe that's true. I don't.
maybe that's what's next. I don't know. Look, you look at all the big wars on the planet right now. They all seem to include Islam. I mean, not Russia, Ukraine. That's the one that doesn't. But and this is another issue about the whole Israel situation. I mean, they focus just on Israel. I think Israel has killed sort of something like 1% or 2% of Muslims who have died in battle in wars over the last 5, 10 years. Like,
Yeah, Syria killed 500,000 people in their
yeah,
civil war. No,
yeah.
no, there's no protests about
Saudi
that.
Arabia, Yemen,
Well, we've laid out a lot of problems and a
with
lot
no
of
solutions.
no solutions.
There's none.
Um, you know, I as you think about how to remain sane in a world where you explore all this negative stuff,
Hmm.
um, how do you do that? How do you, as an individual, and forget the being a YouTuber stuff, just like as an individual, we all face this. We all are in the world with these screens feeding us all this stuff. How do you stay sane, and how do you set yourself up to want to get on with having kids and feel good about that and feel optimistic and not fall into nihilism?
I think the best advice I've ever had is simple, but it's just accept things, be accepting. So maybe not always, maybe not accepting giving up my country to Islamism or something, um, but it helped a lot. When I was living in Argentina, it's the therapist capital of the world. Um, more than New York, it's like,
Really?
yeah, it's mad. So you can go and get like therapy for like $10 an hour, because every street there's a therapist. So I went.
Decades of Peronism drives a country mad, I
I
guess.
think so, and even before then, they were very Freudian, and they're still very Freudian actually. But so I went to see this guy because it was also like a Spanish lesson for me. We spoke in Spanish for an hour once a week. It was great, and I didn't. I was one of those people who thought, "Oh, I don't need this." But look, some people go to therapy, then they go for the rest of their lives, and I'm not sure it's necessarily helping. It might actually be enabling,
Yeah.
and it's almost like it feels good to go, so you go, but then you need more. But I guess if it goes right, you go for an amount of time and then you go, okay, I learned some lessons there. And I think for me, it was I went in, and my therapist said a lot of people go in with this, which is, my mum does this, my girlfriend does that, these people do that, everyone's wrong, and and he would say, well, have you noticed, there's a common theme here, which is that everyone's wrong and you're right. And I think it was gradually, no matter how many times someone tells you that, you don't actually take it in. It's like you need months and months of hearing that message, which he was trying to subtly get through to me, which was, yeah, but your mum's not going to do, like, your dad is not going to, your girlfriend, they're not going to do it. It's not going to change. If you're not happy with the things your girlfriend's doing, you break up with her. If you're going to stay, you're choosing to stay. Stop trying to control and change how everyone around you is behaving, because yes, it will be erratic. Yes, they're going to be wrong, but that's it. And since I got that information, or since it, even like I say, like hearing that, if he just said it on day one, never would have worked, because I was very resistant. I was like, no, but you don't understand. They are doing these things, and it's not fair. And since then, yeah, every relationship in my life is much better. They do things that I don't like. Maybe I get a bit upset, whatever. I take a breath. I go, yeah, it's never going to be perfect. It sounds very Jewish. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be. And that in itself is a kind of perfection. And if you look at the problems that any kind of couple has, or countries have, or anything, it tends to be around people trying to change other people and not accepting that they're simply different. So I don't think this is going to work to keep Islamism out of the UK. But in terms of my life, I get upset about all these different things. I try to change it a little bit, I suppose, by talking about it and letting people understand it, and saying this is what's happening. And then I go, I'm going to read a book and go to sleep, and it's not going to be how I want it. And the world has never been. Maybe it was better in some ways in the 90s or something, but I don't think there's a time in human history that I would choose to live in rather than now. So we're here. It's okay.
I ask this question of every guest. You are not an American, so I have to phrase it slightly differently. So we called the show "Dad Saves America" because I think it is a role we as men can play that is heroic,
Hmm.
where you have agency and where your choices matter in ways that are profound, and
Yeah.
that I think ultimately ladder up to the country. They become the future of the country is the kids we will raise and how we will raise them. How do you think about your role in the future of your country?
Well, with regards to kids, I'd like to have kids. But I don't think I would want to sort of prep them to save the country. I think I wouldn't want to, yeah, give a child a complex from a young age. You're special enough, not just the pressure of having to save them, but also you're the special chosen one. I think it's just they could be happy, hopefully. And as for my role in the country, I think my channel now. I mean, in the UK, things are so much smaller, and so you can be like one of the best known guys on YouTube, with not that many subscribers. So I get recognized now in the UK, and it's really nice. I think even nicer than it is for a lot of other people. Just for the fame of it, because it's not the fame. It's that I put stuff out that go against what a lot of my old friends and a lot of people would think, and it makes you think every now and then, God, am I a bad guy? Am I the anti-immigrant, Islamophobic, transphobic, horrible person?
Yeah.
So when people come up and they approach me and my wife when we're out or whatever, they don't look like horrible monsters. They look like, oh, it's a really sweet looking, nice natured woman who's like 25 and is coming over and saying, thank you so much for what you do. I feel so alone out there. And, you know, that helped her to come to grips with. So I think all I can do is put it out. I put out some quite sensationalist titles, which I wish I didn't have to. But what's the point in having a message and bringing this to people if not as many people as possible see it? Maybe that changes voting patterns. Maybe it changes just on the tiniest percentage. Because what else can you do? So yeah.
Andrew, thanks for being on Dad Saves America.
Thanks for having me. Gosh, I'll see you next time when I've got a couple of kids in a few years.
That's right.